Hey guys, tonight we begin with something so bleak, so brutal, so deeply frozen that it makes your worst breakup feel like a warm hug. Winter during the Black Death years. We're talking about the mid-1300s, when Europe was simultaneously being ravaged by plague, famine, political chaos, and winters so cold they make a Minnesota February look like Club Med. This isn't your cozy holiday movie winter with hot cocoa and sleigh rides. This is, your neighbour just died in his sleep and now he's frozen to the floor winter. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I'm convinced half of you are listening at 3 AM, questioning your life choices. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and get comfortable. Maybe pull that blanket a little tighter. Let's think about this for a second. Have you ever wondered what it was like to survive winter when half your village was already dead from plague? When the church bells rang constantly for funerals? When you couldn't trust your water, your neighbours, or even your own body? Did people just accept that winter meant probable death? Or did they fight back with medieval ingenuity and sheer stubborn rage? Could you make it through 3 months of freezing darkness when your only heat source might literally kill you with smoke inhalation? Would you survive on a diet of mouldy bread and prayers when everyone around you was coughing up their lungs? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in the winter of 1349. The plague has already taken a third of your village. Your firewood is running low, your bread is frozen solid, and somewhere in the distance another church bell begins to toll. Welcome to the worst winter in human history. Let's begin. The Black Death didn't arrive in summer like a polite guest. It came in waves, and by the time winter rolled around in 1348 and 1349, entire communities were already devastated, weakened, and terrified. Now add bone-chilling cold, failed harvests, and the knowledge that your immune system was about as reliable as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. Picture this. You've already watched a third of your village die over the past few months. Your uncle gone, your neighbour's entire family wiped out, the baker who made the only decent bread in town, dead in his shop with his hands still covered in flour. The plague moved through your community like a wildfire, and just when you thought maybe, just maybe, the worst was over, winter decided to join the party. Because apparently one apocalypse wasn't enough. The timing couldn't have been worse. Harvest season in 1348 was an absolute disaster. Why? Because half the farmers were dead. The other half were either sick, terrified, or had fled to the countryside hoping to outrun death itself. Spoiler alert, you can't outrun fleas. Fields of grain sat unharvested, rotting in the autumn rains. Vegetables froze in the ground. Livestock wandered aimlessly, their owners too dead to feed them. Your winter food supply, which was already looking pretty grim, was now basically non-existent. You're standing in your village in early November, looking around at what used to be a thriving community. And it's like someone hit pause on life itself. Shops are closed, houses sit empty, their doors hanging open because no one's left to close them. The mill hasn't run in weeks because the miller died, and no one knows how to fix the water wheel. It's like living in a post-apocalyptic movie, except there's no soundtrack, no heroes, and definitely no hope of a sequel where things get better. And then winter arrives, right on schedule, because nature doesn't care that you're already dealing with a biblical plague. The first frost hits, and suddenly every problem you had just got exponentially worse. That cough you've been ignoring? Now you can see it in the air. A visible cloud of potential death every time you breathe. Those thin walls of your house that barely kept out summer breezes. They're about as effective against winter wind as tissue paper against a blowtorch. Here's where the perfect storm really forms. Your body is already stressed. Medieval peasants weren't exactly well nourished on a good day. Your diet consisted mainly of bread, maybe some vegetables if you were lucky, and the occasional bit of meat if you were really lucky. Now take away half your food supply, add the constant stress of watching everyone around you die. Throw in the physical exhaustion of doing the work of 3 people, because 2 of them are dead, and you've created the perfect conditions for your immune system to just give up entirely. The cold doesn't just make you uncomfortable, it weakens you. Your body spends so much energy trying to stay warm that it has nothing left to fight off disease. And the plague, clever little bacteria that it is, doesn't take winter off. It's still there, still spreading, still killing. But now you're also fighting hypothermia, frostbite, and the very real possibility of freezing to death in your sleep. Medical experts at the time, and by experts I mean people who thought illness was caused by bad smells and planetary alignments, had absolutely no idea what to do. Their advice ranged from useless to actively harmful. Keep the air pure, they said, so people burned herbs and incense, filling their already smoke-choked homes with even more smoke. Avoid cold and dampness, they advised, which would be great advice if you lived in a castle with fireplaces and glass windows, but you don't. You live in a mud and stick hut that's basically a sieve with a roof. The psychological toll was perhaps even worse than the physical. Imagine going to bed every night not knowing if you'll wake up. Not in a philosophical way, but in a very literal, I might die in my sleep from plague or cold or both way. Every morning that you do wake up, you have to check. Are you still breathing? Is everyone else? Does anyone have a fever? Are those buboes? Or just a weird rash? It's like playing Russian roulette every single day, except all the chambers are loaded. Your daily routine becomes a grim calculation of risk versus necessity. Do you venture out into the freezing cold to get water from the well, knowing that the exertion might weaken you enough for the plague to take hold? Or do you stay inside where it's marginally warmer, but risk dehydration? Do you attend church services and pray for salvation while sitting shoulder to shoulder with potentially infected neighbours? Or do you stay home and risk being branded as a heretic or worse, suspicious? The thing about surviving a plague winter is that there's no good option. Every choice is a compromise between different kinds of suffering. You're constantly making terrible decisions and hoping they're slightly less terrible than the alternatives. It's like being asked to choose between eating glass or drinking poison, except the choice is real, and you have to make it every single day. And just when you think things can't get worse, they do. Because winter during the Black Death wasn't just one season, it was multiple winters. The plague came back, again and again. 1348, 1349, 1350, and beyond. Just when you'd survived one brutal winter and thought maybe you were safe, the next winter would bring a fresh wave of death. It was like being stuck in a horror movie that kept getting unnecessary sequels, each one worse than the last. The intersection of plague and winter created a feedback loop of misery. The cold made people more susceptible to disease. The disease made people weaker against the cold. Malnutrition made both worse. Stress and fear suppressed immune systems further. It was a perfectly designed system for killing as many people as possible, as if nature itself had decided that humanity needed a hard reset. Villages that had survived the initial plague wave in summer and fall sometimes completely vanished by spring. Not because everyone died at once, but because winter slowly ground them down. One person would die from plague, then another from cold, then another from starvation, then another from plague again. Until eventually the last survivor would either flee or join the frozen corpses in the village square. You're living through what historians would later call one of the worst demographic catastrophes in human history. But you don't know that. You don't have that perspective. All you know is that yesterday was terrible, today is somehow worse, and tomorrow probably won't come at all. You're just trying to survive one more night in a world that seems determined to end you. So here you are, standing in the frozen wasteland that used to be your home, watching your breath fog in the air, listening to another church bell toll for another dead neighbour, and wondering how exactly you're supposed to make it to spring when winter has barely begun. Welcome to the perfect storm. Population declining rapidly. Medieval homes were drafty death traps on a good day. But during plague winters they became something worse. Quarantine cells that offered neither warmth nor protection. You're huddled inside with potentially infected family members, a sputtering fire, and walls so thin you can hear your neighbour's death rattle 3 houses down. Let's talk about your house, and I use the term house generously. What you're living in is essentially a wooden frame held together with mud, straw, animal dung and prayers. The walls are wattle and daub, which sounds quaint and rustic until you realise it's just sticks woven together and smeared with a mixture that's one strong wind away from returning to its component parts. On a normal winter day, these walls keep out maybe 60% of the cold. During plague winter, when half the village labourers are dead and nobody's had time to do maintenance, that number drops to about 30%. Congratulations! Your home now has the insulation properties of a pasta strainer. The roof isn't much better. Thatch, that romantic cottagecore material beloved by period drama set designers, is actually a disaster waiting to happen. It leaks. Constantly. Every time it snows or rains, moisture seeps through, creating lovely icicles on the inside of your ceiling. Yes, inside. You've got stalactites forming in your bedroom like you're living in a cave system. And when it's not dripping freezing water on your head, it's providing a cosy home for rats, birds, and insects that occasionally fall through onto your dinner. It's like living under a decomposing haystack that sometimes rains vermin. Your floor is dirt. Not hardwood, not tile, not even rough planks. Just dirt. Packed earth that turns to mud when it's wet and freezes solid when it's cold. Right now, it's frozen solid. Walking across your own floor is like walking across a skating rink designed by someone who hates your ankles. And because you can't exactly sweep frozen mud, all the debris from the past few months is just locked in there. Food scraps, animal waste, dropped straw, possibly had a dead mouse or two. It's all preserved in the floor like a really disappointing archaeological dig. The windows, if you can call them that, are basically just holes in the wall. No glass, because glass is for rich people and the church. You've stuffed these holes with whatever you could find. Oiled cloth, animal hides, wadded up rags. But these makeshift coverings are no match for winter wind. The draft that comes through is so strong, it makes your candles flicker across the room. It's like living in a wind tunnel that occasionally remembers it's supposed to be a house. Now, let's discuss the smell. During normal times, medieval homes had a distinctive aroma that could best be described as rustic. During plague winter, that smell evolves into something that would make a garbage collector weep. You've got unwashed bodies, because bathing in winter is basically suicide. You've got smoke from the fire with nowhere to go except through a hole in the roof that's too small and mostly blocked by ice. You've got wet wool from everyone's clothing which smells like a sheep that died of sadness. You've got the chamber pot in the corner that can't be emptied outside because it's too cold, and you're afraid of catching plague from the neighbours. And then there's the plague smell itself. If someone in your house is sick, and let's face it, someone probably is, there's a sweet, sickly odour that permeates everything. It's the smell of infection, of fever, of bodies fighting a losing battle. It gets into the walls, the thatch, your clothes, you can't escape it. Medieval people tried to combat bad smells with herbs and incense, believing that bad air caused disease. So now you've also got the acrid smell of burning rosemary and sage mixing with everything else, creating an olfactory nightmare that would violate several modern Geneva Convention protocols. The fire in your hearth is the only thing standing between you and freezing to death, but it's also trying to kill you in other ways. There's no proper chimney, remember, just a hole in the roof. So all that smoke just kind of hangs around at head height, making everyone cough and your eyes water constantly. You're essentially hotboxing your own house with wood smoke. During plague times, this creates a fun guessing game. Is that a plague cough, or just a smoke inhalation cough? Spoiler alert, sometimes it's both. The single room that constitutes your entire home now serves multiple purposes. It's the bedroom, the kitchen, the living room, the sick room, and occasionally the morgue, all in one convenient location. Privacy doesn't exist. When your sister has diarrhea from bad water, everyone knows. When your father starts developing buboes, everyone sees. When your mother dies in the night, everyone wakes up next to the body. It's like the world's worst studio apartment, except you can't move out because everywhere else is just as bad or worse. Furniture is minimal, a couple of rough wooden benches, maybe a table if you're lucky, some straw mattresses on the floor, a chest for storing what little you own. During plague winter, these few possessions take on new significance. That blanket isn't just a blanket, it's the difference between survival and freezing. That bowl isn't just a bowl, it's one of 3 bowls left after your brother died, and nobody wanted to use his things. Every object in your home is weighted with memory and loss. The space feels even smaller now. Before the plague, your family might have been 6 or 7 people cramped into this single room. Now you're down to 3, but somehow it feels more claustrophobic. The absence is louder than presence ever was. You can see exactly where your daughter used to sleep. You remember your son always sat on that particular patch of floor by the fire. The empty spaces take up more room than the living people, and you can't leave. This is the cruel joke of plague winter housing. Your home is cold, dark, smelly, and full of death and memory, but outside is colder, darker, and definitely full of death. So you're trapped. You spend 14, 15, 16 hours a day in this frozen, smoke-filled box, trying not to touch the walls because they're covered in frost, trying not to breathe too deeply because of the smell, trying not to think about the fact that this might be where you die. Your neighbours are going through the same thing. The walls between houses are so thin you can hear everything. Martin next door coughing up blood. The family 3 houses down wailing over their dead child. Someone somewhere praying loudly and desperately to saints who don't seem to be listening. These sounds become the soundtrack of your life, a constant reminder that you're not alone in your suffering, but also that your suffering might be contagious. At night, when you're trying to sleep on your frozen straw mattress, covered in every piece of cloth you own, listening to your brother's laboured breathing and wondering if he'll make it to morning, your house feels less like shelter and more like a trap. The walls press in. The cold seeps through. The darkness is absolute except for the dying embers of the fire. You're essentially living in a very slow, very cold Iron Maiden. But it's still better than being outside. Barely. It's the medieval equivalent of choosing between a root canal and a colonoscopy. Neither option is good, but you have to pick one, and at least inside you're marginally less likely to freeze solid before dawn. So here you are, in your home that's colder than the morgue down at the church and smells significantly worse, trying to convince yourself that this counts as shelter. Because the alternative is admitting that you're basically camping in winter during a plague outbreak with walls that don't work and a roof that leaks death. Sweet dreams. Try not to die before morning. Firewood was already precious before the plague, but when half the workforce died, who was left to chop it, haul it, and sell it? Suddenly, staying warm wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a full-time job that might kill you before hypothermia did. Let's break down the firewood economy before everything went sideways. In normal times, collecting firewood was a carefully regulated affair. You couldn't just wander into the forest and start chopping down trees like some medieval lumberjack. Oh no. The forest belonged to the Lord, and he had very specific rules about who could take what, when, and how much. Peasants were typically allowed to gather deadfall, branches that had already fallen, and maybe do some careful pruning. Actual tree felling was reserved for authorised woodsmen who knew what they were doing and, more importantly, had permission. This system worked fine when everyone was alive. There were enough workers to collect and process wood, enough carts to haul it, enough people to buy and sell it. A typical peasant family could get by on their gathering rights, plus maybe purchasing a bit extra from the local woodsman. You'd stock up in autumn, store it somewhere relatively dry, and ration it through winter. Uncomfortable, sure, but survivable. Then the plague killed the woodsman, and his apprentice, and half the peasants who used to gather deadfall, and most of the people who owned carts, and suddenly your carefully balanced system collapsed like a house made of, well, wood. Now it's winter 1349, and you need firewood desperately. Your modest stockpile from autumn is running low because you're burning more than planned. It's colder than usual, you're spending more time inside hiding from plague, and also you used extra wood to burn your dead uncle's contaminated bedding. You need more, but where do you get it? The forest is still there, obviously, trees didn't catch plague, but getting to them is now a nightmare. The paths through the woods are uncleared because the people who used to maintain them are dead. Snow has drifted across the roads, and even if you make it to the forest, you have a new problem. You have no idea what you're doing. You're a farmer, not a woodsman. You know how to plant turnips, not how to safely fell a tree. But desperate times call for desperate measures and possibly crush limbs. So you grab your axe, the one you use for everything from splitting kindling to butchering pigs, and you head into the forest. It's brutally cold. Your hands are already numb, the snow is knee-deep in places. You're wearing every piece of clothing you own, which means you can barely move. You're essentially a medieval Michelin man waddling through the woods looking for something to murder. You find a tree, it looks dead. Probably. You start chopping, except your axe is dull because the blacksmith died 3 months ago, and no one knows how to sharpen tools properly. Each swing bounces off the trunk with a pathetic thunk. Your arms are tired after about 30 seconds because you're malnourished and exhausted. This is going to take a while. Several hours later, you've managed to hack through a tree about 6 inches in diameter. It falls, nearly crushing you in the process. Congratulations, you've just spent half a day's energy to acquire maybe 2 days' worth of firewood. But wait, there's more. Now, you have to get this tree home. The dead woodsman used to have a cart and a donkey. You have neither. The cart is rotting in his abandoned yard, and the donkey wandered off and probably died somewhere. So you're dragging this tree through the snow yourself. It weighs approximately 1,000 pounds, or at least it feels that way. You make it about 50 feet before you need to rest. You've got about a mile to go. The sun is setting, the temperature is dropping. This was a terrible idea. You finally make it home after dark, exhausted, freezing, and wondering if the energy you'll get from burning this wood is more than the energy you spent acquiring it. Spoiler, it's probably not. You just ran a caloric deficit to stay warm, which is the medieval equivalent of a Ponzi scheme where you're both the scammer and the victim. And here's the real kicker, you have to do this again, and again, and again. Because one tree doesn't last long when you're burning wood constantly to keep a drafty house marginally above freezing. The math is brutal. You need roughly a tree a week to survive winter. There are 12 to 16 weeks of winter. You need 12 to 16 trees. That's 12 to 16 death marches into the frozen forest to fight trees you don't know how to properly cut down. Some people get creative. They start tearing apart abandoned houses. Why trek into the forest when your dead neighbour's cottage is sitting right there, empty and full of perfectly good lumber? It's morbid and probably technically illegal, but the alternative is freezing. So you and a couple of other desperate survivors spend an afternoon demolishing what used to be the miller's house, dividing up the beams and planks like you're scavengers in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Which, let's be honest, you basically are. Fences disappear overnight. That decorative gate the tanner was so proud of? Firewood. The wooden bridge over the stream? Firewood. The benches outside the church. The priest wants them to stay, but he's outvoted by hypothermia. Everything combustible is suddenly at risk. The village is slowly cannibalizing itself, burning its own infrastructure to survive the winter. Price gouging becomes a real problem. The few remaining woodsmen who survived the plague quickly realize they're sitting on liquid gold. Firewood prices triple, then quadruple. A cord of wood that used to cost a few pennies now costs more than you make in a month. Some woodsmen are making a fortune. Others are getting robbed by desperate peasants who have decided that grand larceny is preferable to freezing to death. It's hard to blame them. The social fabric starts tearing. Neighbours who used to help each other now guard their woodpiles like dragons guarding treasure. You can't leave your firewood outside unattended because someone will steal it. Not out of malice, but out of desperate need. Everyone is cold. Everyone is scared. Everyone will do whatever it takes to survive. Trust becomes a luxury no one can afford. Some villages try to organise communal wood-gathering expeditions. It's safer to go in groups, more efficient to pool resources. But then you have to divide the wood fairly, which leads to arguments. Did Robert really pull his weight, or was he slacking? Should the widow with 3 children get more than the bachelor? What about the family that's clearly infected with plague? Do they get a share, or would that be rewarding them for being plague vectors? These discussions get heated, sometimes literally ending in violence. The irony is that England and most of Europe actually had plenty of forests. Wood wasn't scarce. Labour was scarce. Knowledge was scarce. Organisation was scarce. Carts and donkeys were scarce. But trees? Trees were everywhere. It's like dying of thirst next to a locked water fountain. The resource exists, but the system to access it has completely broken down. Children and elderly people suffer the most. They can't venture into the forest to gather wood. They depend entirely on others who are themselves barely surviving. You see old men sitting by empty hearths, too weak to gather fuel, slowly succumbing to cold. You see children with blue lips huddled together, their parents having died and left them with no means to stay warm. It's heartbreaking and infuriating and utterly preventable, except it's not preventable, because the plague has destroyed the social infrastructure that made survival possible. Some people burn inappropriate things out of desperation. Furniture goes into the fire, not just wood furniture. People are burning chairs, tables, beds. Family heirlooms that survive generations get sacrificed to the flames. Books, rare and precious in medieval times, become kindling. religious icons, paintings, anything that will combust. You're burning your past to survive your present with no guarantee of a future. The exhaustion is cumulative. Every trip to the forest drains you a little more. Every day of inadequate heating weakens you further. Every night spent shivering instead of sleeping leaves you less capable the next day. It's a death spiral where the effort required to stay warm is slowly killing you anyway, just more slowly than freezing wood. By February, you're burning green wood because that's all that's left within reasonable distance. Green wood barely burns, produces tons of smoke, and releases a fraction of the heat of properly seasoned wood. But it's better than nothing. Barely. Your house is now filled with so much smoke you can barely see across the room. Everyone's coughing constantly. But at least you're coughing while marginally warm instead of coughing while frozen. The firewood crisis isn't just about being cold, it's about how the complete collapse of a basic resource supply chain can turn survival into a full-time job that you're not qualified for and probably can't sustain. It's about watching a simple necessity become an impossible luxury. It's about burning your village's future, literally, to survive its present. So here you are, exhausted from another failed expedition to the forest, sitting by a pathetic fire made from your neighbour's fence, wondering how people in the future will manage to stay warm. Surely, you think, they'll figure out something better than this. Spoiler alert, they will, but you won't live to see it. You can't sleep alone when it's this cold. But sleeping in a communal pile during a plague outbreak is like playing Russian roulette with body heat. Every cough, every fever, every suspicious lump becomes a source of terror as you try to survive the night without contracting the very thing that's already killed half your family. Let's talk about the impossible math of plague winter sleeping. On one hand, you have basic thermodynamics. Human bodies generate heat. Multiple human bodies in close proximity generate more heat. In a freezing medieval house with walls that might as well be suggestions, this shared warmth is literally the difference between waking up alive and waking up dead. On the other hand, you have the plague, which spreads through close contact with infected people. So your choice is freeze to death alone, or maybe catch the plague and die horribly while slightly warmer. It's like choosing between being eaten by a shark or a crocodile. Either way, you're getting eaten. Your family huddles together at night out of pure necessity. There's usually one straw mattress, maybe two if you were relatively prosperous before the world ended. Everyone piles on, parents in the middle, children tucked around them, grandparents on the edges if they're still alive. You're essentially creating a human lasagna of survival, each layer adding marginal warmth while also adding exponential disease risk. The sleeping arrangement follows a grim logic. The youngest and oldest get priority placement in the centre, where it's warmest, because they're most likely to die from cold. But this also means they're most likely to spread disease if they're infected, because they're touching everyone. The healthiest, strongest people sleep on the edges, acting as insulation and windbreaks for the more vulnerable. It's very noble and communal. It's also a perfect system for ensuring that when one person gets sick, everyone gets sick. You lie there in the darkness, pressed against your brother on one side and your mother on the other, and every sensation becomes a potential death sentence. Your brother coughs. Is that a normal cough? A cold weather cough? Or is that the first sign of plague? Your mother shifts in her sleep and you feel that she's warmer than usual. Is she just closer to the fireside of the pile? Or is she running a fever? You spend half the night in a state of hypervigilant terror, analysing every breath, every movement, every sound. The worst part is when someone is clearly sick. Maybe your sister has been feeling unwell for a few days. She's developed a fever, she's coughing more. There might be swelling in her neck, or maybe that's just your imagination in the darkness. What do? If you exile her from the sleeping pile, she'll almost certainly die from cold. But if you let her stay, she might infect everyone else. It's Sophie's choice, medieval edition, and there's no good answer. Most families keep the sick person in the pile, not because they're stupid or don't understand contagion. Medieval people weren't idiots. They knew plague spread from person to person, but because abandoning a family member to freeze alone goes against every human instinct. So you make your peace with the risk. You pray harder. You tuck your sister into the middle of the pile where she'll be warmest. And you hope that maybe God will spare the rest of you. He usually doesn't. The physical logistics of communal sleeping during plague winter are a special kind of awkward nightmare. You're wearing all your clothes, remember, because it's freezing. So you're trying to sleep in multiple layers of wool, linen and possibly leather, all of which is scratchy, binding and uncomfortable. You can't move much because you're wedged between other people who are also wearing all their clothes. It's like trying to sleep in a crowded closet where everyone is wearing winter coats and nobody's allowed to leave. Body odour reaches new and exciting levels. Nobody's bathed in months because bathing in winter is suicide. Everyone's clothes are filthy because washing them means they won't dry and you'll freeze. So you're essentially sleeping in a pile of progressively ripening humans, marinating in each other's sweat, breath and various other emissions. The smell is indescribable. It's like a locker room, a barn, and a plague ward had a baby, and that baby never bathed. You get used to it, sort of, the same way you get used to living in constant fear of death. Which is to say, you don't really get used to it, you just stop noticing because you've lost all frame of reference for what normal is supposed to be. Children crying in the night take on new terror. Is your nephew crying because he's cold and uncomfortable, or because he's in pain from developing buboes? Do you comfort him and risk exposing yourself if he's infected? Or do you lie there frozen with fear, literally and figuratively, while a child suffers? There's no parenting manual for how to comfort your possibly plague-infected toddler, while also not dying yourself. You just do your best and hope it's enough. The snoring is actually a comfort. Weird, right? But snoring means breathing, and breathing means alive. You lie there in the darkness listening to your father's rattling snore, and it's the most beautiful sound in the world because it means he made it through another night. When the snoring stops, that's when you panic. Did he just shift position, or did he stop breathing? You lie there, straining to hear, sometimes reaching out in the darkness to check if his chest is still moving. Medieval sleeping is basically one long anxiety attack with occasional moments of unconsciousness. Privacy is a concept that died along with about 30% of Europe. There is no privacy in a communal sleep pile. When your mother needs to use the chamber pot in the night, everyone knows. When your brother has a nightmare, everyone wakes up. When your sister starts her monthly courses, it's a community event. Every bodily function, every vulnerable moment, every embarrassing reality of being human is shared with your entire family. It's intimacy at a level that would make modern people run screaming into the night. The worst nights are when someone dies in the pile. It happens more often than you'd think. Your grandmother goes to sleep tucked between you and your aunt, and sometime in the dark hours she just stops. You don't always notice immediately. It's dark. Everyone's bundled up. She's not moving, but nobody moves much anyway because you're all wedged together like sardines. Sometimes you don't realise someone's dead until morning light reveals their grey face and cooling body. Congratulations, you've just spent 6 hours sleeping next to a corpse. Sweet dreams are most definitely not made of this. Even when nobody dies, sleep itself is elusive. You're cold despite the body heat. You're uncomfortable because you're lying on straw and dirt. You're scared because plague. You're worried about tomorrow. You're grieving yesterday. Your mind won't shut off. Medieval people didn't have the luxury of just relaxing into sleep. Sleep was something you occasionally achieved between bouts of freezing, itching, worrying, and listening to your family's various biological functions. Shift changes happen throughout the night. Someone has to get up to tend the fire, because if it dies, everyone might die. This requires carefully extracting yourself from the sleeping pile, without waking everyone or letting too much cold air in. It's like the world's deadliest game of Jenga. You wiggle out, immediately get blasted by freezing air, stumble to the fire in the darkness, poke some embers, add a precious piece of wood, then scramble back to the pile and try to wedge yourself back in. Everyone grumbles because you've let cold in. You've disrupted the carefully calibrated body heat system, but it's necessary, so it happens 3 or 4 times a night, every night. Some families try to create barriers within the sleeping arrangement. Maybe they put a blanket between the sick and the healthy. Maybe they designate one end of the mattress as the quarantine zone. These measures are adorable in their optimism and completely ineffective in reality. Plague doesn't respect blanket boundaries. Fleas don't stop at imaginary lines. The bacteria doesn't care about your attempt at medieval social distancing. But people try anyway, because doing something feels better than doing nothing, even when that something is useless. Morning brings its own horrors. You wake up, if you wake up, and have to assess the damage. Who made it through the night? Who's developed symptoms? Who's colder than they should be? The morning body check becomes a ritual of dread. You open your eyes, take stock of your own condition first. Still breathing? No obvious buboes? Fingers and toes still have feeling? Then you look at the people around you. You check faces for colour, bodies for warmth, breathing for rhythm. It's like being a very unqualified medical examiner every single morning. The intimacy of plague winter sleeping creates bonds and trauma in equal measure. You know your family better than any human should know another human. You've seen them at their most vulnerable, most disgusting, most terrified. You've shared body heat, breath, fear, and possibly plague. If you all survive to spring, and that's a very big if, you'll never quite be able to look at each other the same way. You've been through something that breaks people. You've slept in a pile of plague and prayers and somehow lived to tell about it. Or maybe you didn't live. Maybe this is your last winter sleeping pile. Maybe tomorrow you'll be the cold one everyone checks for breathing. Maybe your cough will be the one keeping everyone awake in terror. Either way, it's time to close your eyes, press against your potentially infected family members, and hope that body heat wins the battle against both cold and contagion. Sleep tight. Try not to catch plague. See you in the morning. Probably. The plague killed farmers. It killed bakers. It killed everyone who knew how to preserve food properly. By winter, you're staring at reserves that were supposed to last until spring, but are now being rationed for a population that keeps shrinking. Your dinner options, frozen turnips, bread that could double as a weapon, or nothing. Let's start with what passes for breakfast in Plague Winter 1349. You wake up, congratulations on not dying in your sleep, and immediately face the day's first impossible question. Do you eat now or save your meagre rations for later? Your stomach is growling. You haven't had a proper meal in days, but you also know that what's in your larder is all there is. There's no grocery store, there's no food delivery. The weekly market hasn't happened in months because all the vendors are dead. What you have right now is literally all you're going to get until spring, assuming you make it that far. Your food storage situation is grim. Before the plague, your family had maybe 6 months of provisions stored away. Grain in sacks, dried beans, some salted meat if you were lucky, root vegetables buried in the cellar. It wasn't gourmet, but it was survivable. Then the plague hit, and suddenly you're feeding fewer people, which should mean the food lasts longer, right? Wrong. Because when your father died, he was the one who knew exactly how much to ration per day. When your mother died, she was the one who knew how to make the grain stretch with creative cooking. Now you're just guessing, and you're probably guessing wrong. Let's talk about bread, the staple of medieval life. In normal times, you'd take your grain to the village mill, get it ground into flour, then take it to the baker who'd bake it for you. This system worked great when the miller and the baker were alive. Now they're not. The mill sits idle because nobody knows how to fix the grinding stones properly. The bakery is closed because the baker's entire family died within a week of each other. So if you want bread, you're making it yourself with whatever grain you can grind by hand using stones, and then baking it in your inadequate home oven. The result is bread that could legitimately be classified as a weapon. It's dense, it's hard, it's made from flour ground so coarsely, it's basically just cracked grain with aspirations. You bake it without proper leavening because the starter died. Literally, the yeast culture someone's grandmother had been maintaining for decades just stopped working when everyone got too sick to feed it. What emerges from your oven is a disk of compressed grain matter that requires serious jaw strength to consume. You have to soak it in water or weak ale just to make it chewable. It's like eating edible pottery, but it's calories, so you eat it and pretend it's delicious. Root vegetables become your best friend and worst enemy. Turnips, onions, parsnips. These were harvested in autumn and stored in your cellar, buried in sand or straw to keep them from freezing. Except your cellar isn't heated, so they're freezing anyway. You pull out a turnip that's been down there since October, and it's rock solid. Not frozen, but will thaw solid. More like frozen into a new state of matter solid. You could use it as a hammer. In fact, you briefly consider using it as a hammer before remembering that this frozen root is also your dinner. You bring it inside and place it by the fire to thaw. This takes approximately 4 hours. When it finally thaws, you discover it's partially rotten on one side. Because of course it is. You cut away the rot, or what you hope is all the rot, and you're left with maybe half a turnip. You boil it because everything gets boiled. Boiling is the medieval solution to all food safety questions. Is this meat questionable? Boil it. Is this water suspicious? Boil it. Has this vegetable seen better days? Boil it. The resulting meal is a watery soup featuring sad, mushy turnip pieces floating in liquid that tastes like depression. Protein is a distant memory. In normal times, you might have had a bit of bacon, some eggs from chickens, maybe milk from a cow. Now, your pig died in autumn, and you had to butcher it fast before the meat spoiled, which meant everyone ate a lot of pork for a few days and then nothing. Your chickens stopped laying eggs because it's too cold and they're too stressed. One of them died, you ate it. The others are now indoor pets who contribute nothing except droppings and judgment. Your neighbour had a cow, but it died of something, possibly plague, possibly just the general misery of existing, and nobody wanted to risk eating potentially plague-infected beef, so it's just frozen in his yard, a monument to better times. The preservation methods you're relying on are medieval in the worst way. Salting works great for preservation when you have salt. You don't have much salt. Salt was expensive before the plague. Now it's basically unobtainable because the salt merchants are dead and nobody's maintaining the trade routes. So your salted meat is undersalted, which means it's not really preserved, which means it's slowly rotting despite the cold. You eat it anyway because the alternative is starving. Smoking meat was another preservation method, but that required a smokehouse and knowledge of how to do it properly. Your village's expert smoker of meats died in the first wave of plague. The smokehouse is still there, but using it without knowing what you're doing just results in partially cooked, partially smoked, fully disgusting meat that tastes like a campfire accident. Let's discuss mould, everyone's favourite uninvited dinner guest. That grain you've been storing? Mouldy. Those dried beans? Also mouldy. That hard cheese someone made last summer? So mouldy it's basically a new life form. Medieval people knew mould was bad. They weren't idiots. But when your choice is eat mouldy food or eat nothing, you start making compromises. You cut away the obvious mould, tell yourself the rest is fine, and eat it while trying not to think about what you're doing to your digestive system. The worst part is watching food go bad and being unable to stop it. You stored everything as carefully as you could, but without proper temperature control, without the knowledge that died with the experienced housewives, without the resources to do it right. Things just deteriorate. You watch your winter stores slowly transform from questionable to dangerous to possibly lethal, and there's nothing you can do about it except keep eating and hoping today's meal isn't the one that kills you. Portions are a source of constant anxiety and argument. Who gets more? The children because they're growing, the adults because they're doing hard labour, the sick because they need strength to fight off plague. Everyone has an opinion, and every mealtime becomes a negotiation. You try to be fair, but fair is subjective when everyone's starving. Your brother thinks he deserves more because he gathered firewood yesterday. Your sister thinks she deserves more because she's nursing a baby. Your mother thinks everyone should get equal shares regardless. Nobody's happy with any solution. Meal frequency drops from 3 times a day to twice a day to once a day to whenever we can't ignore the hunger anymore. You start understanding why medieval people were obsessed with feast days. Not because they were gluttonous, but because most of the time they were starving, and the occasional feast was the only thing that made life bearable. Except there are no feasts during plague winter. There's just an endless parade of frozen turnips and hard bread. Water intake is a joke. You know you should drink water to stay healthy. But water is a whole thing. You have to break ice, haul it inside, boil it to make sure it won't kill you, then wait for it to cool enough to drink. This process takes so much energy that sometimes you just don't bother. You get your liquid from watery soup and weak ale and hope it's enough. Dehydration becomes just another thing slowly killing you, joining the list that includes cold, disease, starvation, and general medieval existence. Some people start eating things that are definitely not food. Bark from trees because someone heard it was edible once. Leather from old boots, boiled until it's soft enough to chew. Grass and hay like you're a cow. These experiments rarely go well. You end up with spectacular diarrhea or vomiting or both, which just accelerates your path to death because now you're losing what little nutrition you had. The psychological toll of food scarcity is maybe worse than the physical. Every meal is accompanied by guilt. Should you be eating this? Should you save it for tomorrow? What if someone needs it more? What if this is the last meal you ever have and you wasted it on a frozen turnip? Food stops being about enjoyment or even sustenance. It becomes a complex calculation of survival, ethics, and despair. Children suffer the most visibly. You watch your nephew get thinner day by day. His cheeks hollow out. His eyes get bigger in his shrinking face. He stops playing because he doesn't have the energy. He just sits by the fire, too weak to complain about hunger, which is somehow worse than if he were crying. Medieval childhood during Plague Winter is basically just slow-motion starvation, interrupted by brief moments of eating something that barely qualifies as food. The irony is that in some houses, there's actually more food per person than before the plague because half the family is dead. But you can't bring yourself to eat their share. It feels wrong, like you're benefiting from their death. So you stick to your pre-plague rations even though mathematically you could eat more, and you slowly starve while sitting next to your dead brother's portion of grain that nobody will touch. By February, you've developed a relationship with hunger that borders on intimate. It's always there, a constant companion. You've stopped dreaming about feasts or fancy food. Now you dream about plain bread, fresh bread, soft bread, bread that doesn't require soaking. Your aspirations have shrunk to match your stomach. You're not hoping for luxury. You're just hoping to not be actively starving. Some mornings, you wake up and seriously consider just not eating. Save the food for someone else. Speed up the inevitable. But then survival instinct kicks in, and you force down another piece of weapon bread soaked in questionable water. And you tell yourself that tomorrow might be better. It won't be. But the lie gets you through another day. So here you are, gnawing on a piece of bread that could double as a doorstop, trying to chew a half-rotten turnip that was frozen solid this morning, and wondering if the mould you just ate will kill you before the plague does. Bon appétit. Try not to think about the fact that this is considered a good meal by current standards. Winter water is a special kind of torture. You have to break through ice to get it, haul it back without dying of exhaustion, and then hope it doesn't give you dysentery on top of everything else. Because yes, medieval water could kill you even when it was frozen solid. Let's talk about your village well, the community water source that everyone depends on and nobody maintains properly. In summer, it's a social gathering spot where people gossip and complain and fill their buckets. In Plague Winter, it's a frozen hellmouth that might kill you just for attempting to use it. The surface is covered with ice, sometimes several inches thick. You can't just dip your bucket in and pull up water. You need to break through first, which requires a heavy stick or rock, and approximately 15 minutes of aggressive violence directed at frozen water. You stand there in the freezing pre-dawn darkness because you need water for the day, slamming a stick into the ice over and over. Your hands are numb. Your breath creates clouds of fog. Other villagers who aren't dead are waiting behind you, equally desperate, equally miserable. Someone mutters that you're taking too long. You want to hit them with the stick instead of the ice. Finally break. After what feels like an eternity, you break through, and dark, uninviting water appears below. Now comes the fun part, actually getting water out. Your bucket, which is wooden and already cracked from years of use, needs to be lowered carefully because the rope is also old and might snap from the cold. You lower it through the hole you just made, trying not to let it hit the ice edges and crack further. The bucket fills. You start hauling it up. The rope burns your frozen hands. The bucket is heavier than you remember, probably because you're malnourished and exhausted. Halfway up, you lose your grip. The bucket falls back down with a splash. You have to start over. Everyone behind you groans. On your third attempt, you successfully extract a bucket of water. Congratulations. You've just completed a task that, in the future, people will accomplish by turning a handle. You've earned maybe 3 gallons of water after 20 minutes of hard labour in sub-zero temperatures. This water needs to last your family all day for drinking, cooking, and the absolute minimum of washing. Spoiler alert, it won't be enough. But here's the problem. This water is disgusting. The well serves the entire village, and the village has been dealing with plague for months. Bodies have been buried near the well. The ground around it is contaminated with waste because the plague killed the people who used to maintain proper sanitation. Rats live in the well housing. Birds defecate near the opening. Your dead neighbour Thomas fell into this well 3 months ago, and while they fished him out, nobody's entirely sure they got all of him. The water might be clear, but it's absolutely teeming with bacteria, parasites, and possibly revenge spirits. Medieval people knew water could make you sick. They weren't stupid. That's why they boiled it, or, more commonly, just drank ale instead. But boiling water requires fuel, and fuel is scarce, remember? So you're faced with another impossible choice. Burn precious firewood to boil water, and maybe not freeze to death later, or drink questionable water, and maybe get dysentery. There's no good option. It's just varying degrees of awful. Let's say you decide to boil it. Responsible choice. You haul your bucket of possibly contaminated water back home, which is its own adventure. The path is icy. You're carrying a heavy bucket, you slip twice, spilling some water, which immediately freezes on the ground and creates a new ice patch for someone else to slip on tomorrow. You're basically creating a hazard obstacle course for your neighbours, but everyone's doing it. So the paths through the village are now ice skating rinks of death. You make it home without dying. You pour water into your cooking pot, the one pot your family owns that's used for everything from soup to boiling dubious medical herbs. You place it over the fire and wait, and wait, and wait. Because heating water to boiling in a medieval house with a weak fire takes approximately forever. An hour later, you have hot water. You've just burned through a significant portion of your daily firewood allocation to achieve something that future humans will accomplish in 90 seconds with an electric kettle. But at least the water is safe now, right? Well, safer. The boiling killed most of the bacteria and parasites. Most, not all. And it did nothing about the chemical contamination from all the unmentionable things that have seeped into the groundwater. But it's the best you can do, so you let it cool slightly and drink it, trying not to think about Thomas's final swim. Some people don't bother boiling. They just drink the water straight from the well and hope for the best. This is playing Russian roulette with your intestines. Sometimes you're fine. Sometimes you get mild stomach upset. Sometimes you get full-blown dysentery that leaves you unable to leave the house for days, which during plague winter might actually be a death sentence because you can't gather firewood or food while you're explosively dehydrated. Snow becomes an alternative water source, which sounds quaint and natural until you remember that medieval snow is not pristine. It's fallen through air filled with smoke from hundreds of fires. It's landed on ground contaminated with waste, animal droppings and plague victim runoff. It looks white and pure, but it's basically a frozen sponge that's absorbed every disgusting thing in your village. Still, people collect it because gathering snow is easier than fighting with the frozen well. You fill containers with snow, bring them inside, and wait for them to melt. This takes hours because, again, everything takes hours in medieval winter. When it finally melts, you're left with about 1/10 the water volume you expected because snow is mostly air. So you need 10 buckets of snow to get 1 bucket of water. The math is depressing. You spend half the day collecting snow to end up with barely enough water to make soup. Ice from the nearby stream or pond is another option, theoretically. But medieval people knew that standing water was even more dangerous than well water. Streams were better, but the stream near your village is downstream from other villages, which means it's carrying their waste, their plague runoff, their problems. You're basically drinking diluted sewage that happens to be frozen. Fun stuff. The physical act of carrying water in winter is its own form of torture. Water is heavy. A full bucket weighs about 20 pounds. You're malnourished and weak. The distance from the well to your house is maybe 300 feet, but it feels like 3 miles. Your arms scream. Your back aches. You have to set the bucket down multiple times to rest. Other villagers pass you, also carrying water, everyone moving in slow motion like the world's saddest parade. Women and children traditionally did water hauling in medieval times, but plague winter has scrambled all traditional roles. Everyone who can walk carries water. Young boys are doing the work of grown men. Elderly women are hauling buckets because there's no one else. Children barely big enough to lift a bucket are doing their best. It's heartbreaking and necessary in equal measure. The bucket situation is critical. Your family probably owns 2 buckets, maybe 3 if you were well off before the plague. These buckets are precious. If one breaks, you can't just buy a new one because the cooper who made buckets is dead. So you treat your buckets like they're made of gold. You patch them carefully when they leak. You're gentle with them even though you want to throw them against a wall in frustration. Bucket maintenance becomes a crucial survival skill. Rationing water is a daily battle. Everyone needs water. Everyone wants water, but there's never enough. You try to establish rules. 1 ladle per person for drinking, 1 pot for cooking, and absolutely nothing for washing because washing is a luxury you can't afford. These rules last about a day before someone sneaks extra water because they're desperately thirsty, and then accusations fly, and suddenly the family is fighting over water like it's liquid gold. Which, let's be honest, it basically is. Dehydration is a constant state of being. You're not drinking enough water because there isn't enough. Your lips are cracked. Your mouth is constantly dry. Your pee is dark. When you can manage to pee at all, you get headaches that might be dehydration or might be hunger or might be plague. You can't tell anymore. Everything hurts. Adding more hurt to the pile is just part of the experience. The truly desperate start eating snow directly, which is a terrible idea for multiple reasons. First, eating snow lowers your body temperature, which you absolutely cannot afford in plague winter. Second, your body has to use energy to melt the snow, energy you don't have. Third, that snow is contaminated, remember? But desperation makes people do stupid things, so you see villagers scooping handfuls of snow into their mouths, and you judge them silently while knowing you'll probably do the same thing tomorrow. Children suffer especially from the water shortage. They need water to stay healthy, but their last priority because adults are doing the heavy labour and need to stay functional. You watch children with dry, cracked lips begging for just a little more water, and you have to say no because the water needs to last. It's soul-crushing. It's necessary. It's one more way plague winter destroys you from the inside out. The bucket you hauled at dawn is empty by midday. You need more water. The well is frozen again because it's been 5 hours and the temperature is below zero. You have to do the whole thing over again. Break ice, lower bucket, haul water, carry it home, maybe boil it. All while knowing that you'll have to do this again tomorrow and the day after and every day until spring, assuming you live that long. Some nights you're so exhausted from water hauling that you skip getting water entirely. You tell yourself you'll do 2 trips tomorrow to make up for it. You never do. The water deficit just grows. Your family gets by on less and less. Everyone's perpetually thirsty. The constant dehydration weakens immune systems further, making everyone more susceptible to plague. It's a death spiral with ice at the centre. Here's the ultimate irony. You're surrounded by water. It's everywhere, frozen in every direction. Snow, ice, frost on every surface. But you're dying of thirst because accessing that water requires more energy than you have, and even when you get it, it might kill you anyway. It's like dying of thirst on a frozen ocean. The resource is abundant. The ability to use it safely is not. So you stand at the well in the pre-dawn cold, stick in hand, breaking through ice for the 3rd time this week, wondering how something as simple as drinking water became an epic quest with potentially fatal consequences. You haul your bucket home, ration it carefully, hope nobody gets dysentery, and pray that tomorrow's water run will be easier. It won't be, but hope is free, and right now, it's one of the few things you have more of than water. You own maybe 2 outfits total, and both smell like a barn fire. But in plague winter, you wear everything you have, all at once, creating a cocoon of wool, linen, dirt, and desperate hope. Fashion is dead. Survival is the only trend that matters. Let's start with what you're actually wearing right now, in the winter of 1349. First, against your skin, is a linen undershirt, or what's left of one. You've been wearing it continuously since October. It was off-white when you put it on. Now it's a shade of brown-grey that doesn't exist in nature. This shirt has absorbed months of sweat, smoke, fear, and various other bodily secretions. It's crusty in places you'd rather not think about. It itches constantly. The lice living in its seams have established a thriving colony with a robust economy, and possibly a rudimentary government. Over the undershirt you wear a wool tunic. Wool is miracle fabric in medieval times. It keeps you warm even when wet. It's relatively durable, and it's all you can afford. The downside? Wool itches like you've been rolling in fiberglass insulation. Medieval wool wasn't the soft, processed stuff you buy at modern stores. It was coarse, scratchy, and filled with bits of stick and sheep that never quite got cleaned out. Wearing it directly against your skin would be torture. That's why you have the linen undershirt, which is now so filthy it's basically creating a protective dirt barrier between you and the wool. Silver linings. But one wool tunic isn't enough, obviously, so you wear a second one over the first. This one is even more threadbare than the first because it's older, and you wear it on the outside where it takes more abuse. It has holes, multiple holes. You've patched some of them with scraps from your dead uncle's shirt. The patches don't match. You look like a quilt that gained sentience and decided to have a really bad day. But it adds another layer of warmth, so you wear it with something resembling pride, or at least resignation. Leggings are next. Medieval leggings aren't like modern yoga pants. They're basically wool tubes tied to your waist with string. Designed to cover your legs in the loosest sense of the word, they sag, they twist, they refuse to stay up properly. You spend half your day hiking them back up while trying to maintain some dignity. In winter, you wear 2 pairs, one over the other, which means double the sagging, double the twisting, and double the frustration. They bunch up around your knees and ankles, creating uncomfortable lumps inside your shoes. If you have shoes. Shoes are their own catastrophe. If you're lucky enough to own shoes, and after the plague that's not guaranteed because your father's shoes died with him, and your brother's feet are different sizes. They're made of leather that's been worn so thin you can feel every pebble through the sole. In winter, they're essentially frozen leather shells that offer minimal protection against cold, wet, dust, or sharp objects. You've stuffed them with straw for insulation, which helps for about an hour before the straw compacts into a hard, uncomfortable lump under your foot. Walking becomes a hobble. Running is impossible. Not that you have anywhere to run except toward death at various speeds. Some people don't have shoes at all. The cobbler died, and nobody else knows how to make them properly. So you see villagers wrapping their feet in rags and leather scraps, tying them on with string, hobbling through the snow like sad, human-shaped packages. Frostbite claims toes regularly. You watch neighbours lose one toe, then another, the blackened digits falling off like nature's cruelest countdown. By spring, if you make it to spring, you'll consider yourself blessed if you still have all 10 toes attached to your feet in working order. Cloaks are essential. Your cloak is made of wool, obviously, because everything is made of wool. It's heavy when dry and spectacularly heavy when wet, which it often is because snow melts on it and then refreezes. You wear your cloak over all your other layers, fastened at the neck with a wooden pin that keeps poking you in the collarbone. The cloak drags behind you, picking up mud, snow, animal waste, and questionable substances. The bottom edge is so filthy and frozen stiff that it could stand up on its own. You're basically wearing a wearable tent that's been through a war. Head coverings are non-negotiable. You wear a wool cap, possibly a hood, maybe a wrapped cloth if you're desperate. Your ears will freeze and fall off without protection. This is not an exaggeration. People lose ears to frostbite, so you cover your head religiously. The problem is that covering your head traps all your body heat near your scalp, which sounds great, until you realise it also traps smoke, smells, and humidity. Your head covering becomes a petri dish for scalp conditions you can't diagnose and certainly can't treat. Gloves or mittens are a luxury item most people don't have. The wealthy might have leather gloves lined with fur. You have your hands, which you keep tucked inside your cloak or under your armpits when you're not using them. This makes doing literally anything incredibly awkward. Gathering firewood with numb hands, nearly impossible. Hauling water when you can't feel your fingers, a recipe for disaster. Breaking ice at the well when your hands are too frozen to grip the stick. Time to use your foot and hope you don't slip. Some creative souls have wrapped their hands in rags, creating makeshift mittens that are better than nothing but not by much. The rags get wet, freeze solid, and turn your hands into clubs. You can't grip anything properly. Fine motor skills are a distant memory. You're essentially wearing hand-shaped ice blocks and pretending they're functional. Layering becomes an art form and a science. You learn through trial and error how to arrange your clothes for maximum warmth. Tuck your undershirt into your leggings to prevent drafts. Overlap your tunic so there's no gap at the waist. Wrap your cloak tightly and pin it strategically. Every adjustment is calculated for warmth retention. You're like a medieval engineer, except instead of designing bridges, you're designing a personal insulation system that might keep you alive another day. The weight of all these layers is substantial. You're wearing maybe 15 pounds of clothing, all of it damp, dirty, and determined to drag you down. Moving is exhausting. Bending over is nearly impossible. You're so bulked up with layers that you're basically a human sausage. Sitting down requires careful planning to avoid crushing or twisting your layers into uncomfortable positions. You waddle more than walk, moving through your village like a portly penguin who's given up on life. Taking off your clothes is not an option. You wore them to bed last night. You're wearing them today. You'll wear them to bed tonight. You'll wear them tomorrow. You haven't removed your base layer in months because taking it off means being cold while you're naked, and being cold while naked in plague winter is suicidal. So the clothes stay on, accumulating filth, oils, dead skin, and probably new forms of bacteria. The smell is indescribable. Imagine wet wool that's never been washed, mixed with human sweat, smoke from the fire, animal odours from sleeping near livestock, and the general funk of medieval life. Now concentrate that smell because it's trapped between multiple layers of fabric. You marinate in your own essence. Other people smell too, so you don't notice it as much, but occasionally you get a whiff of yourself and think, "Dear God, is that me?" Yes, it is. Washing clothes is theoretically possible but practically suicidal. To wash your tunic, you'd need to remove it, which means being cold. Then you'd need to haul water, heat it, wash the tunic and wait days for it to dry because nothing dries in winter. During those days, you'd be without that layer of warmth, possibly freezing to death while your tunic hangs damply by the fire, mocking you. So you don't wash your clothes. Nobody washes their clothes. Everyone just accepts that filth is part of the uniform now. Mending is constant. Your clothes are falling apart from age, wear, and the sheer strain of keeping your unworthy body from freezing. Holes appear daily, seams split, hems unravel. You spend evenings by the fire with a needle and thread, patching holes with whatever scraps you can find. Your clothes become patchworks of different fabrics and colours, a wearable history of everyone who died and left their clothing behind. You're wearing your dead neighbour's sleeve, your dead aunt's cloak patch, your dead brother's tunic square. It's like a memorial quilt except depressing and you can't take it off. Children's clothing situation is especially dire. Kids grow even when starving, and their clothes don't grow with them. You see children whose sleeves end halfway up their forearms, whose leggings expose their shins, whose tunics are so short they're basically shirts. Parents do their best, letting out seams, adding fabric strips to lengthen garments, but there's only so much you can do when the base garment is already worn to threads. Some children are dressed in adult clothes that hang on them like tents. Others wear multiple too small garments layered together, looking like small, poorly wrapped packages. The social levelling that comes from everyone being equally filthy is oddly comforting. Before the plague, you could tell someone's social status by their clothes. Rich people had multiple outfits, dyed fabrics, better materials. Poor people had one rough wool outfit and looked accordingly. Now, everyone looks like they've been dragged through a medieval apocalypse, which they have. The merchant's daughter wears the same filthy layered rags as the farmer's son. Death and winter are great equalisers. Everyone's fashion sense has been reduced to, will this keep me alive? Removing layers is a process. If you need to use the chamber pot or, God forbid, go outside to relieve yourself, you have to unwrap like a very smelly present. Unpin the cloak, hoist multiple tunics, fumble with legging ties that your frozen fingers can barely feel. Do your business, rewrap everything, repin, retie. The whole process takes 5 minutes in the dark and cold, and by the time you're done, you've lost all your accumulated body heat and have to start warming up again from scratch. Some people have stopped changing positions while sleeping because adjusting your body means adjusting all your layers, and that lets cold air in. So you find a position that's tolerably uncomfortable, and you stay there all night, slowly going numb in weird places, waking up with your arm asleep and your hip aching. But at least you didn't die of exposure while rearranging your woolens. The dream of clean, dry, well-fitted clothes becomes an obsession. You fantasize about it more than food. In your imagination, you're wearing a soft linen shirt that doesn't itch, a wool tunic without holes, leggings that stay up, and shoes that fit. Your clothes smell like lavender instead of desperation. You're warm but not sweating, comfortable but not freezing. It's a beautiful dream. It's also completely impossible. So you shuffle through another day, wrapped in your mobile textile prison, scratching at lice bites through multiple layers, smelling yourself and others, and being grateful that at least the clothing you have is keeping you marginally less frozen than you would be without it. Fashion is dead. Style is irrelevant. You're dressed like a walking testament to human survival instinct, wrapped in every scrap of fabric you own, hoping that thread and wool and sheer stubborn refusal to die will get you through another winter night. Congratulations, you're the best-dressed person you know, which is to say you're an itchy, smelly disaster who hasn't frozen to death yet. That's the bar now. Bodies don't decompose in winter. They just freeze where they fall. This means your village is now decorated with ice-covered corpses that no one has the strength or courage to bury. It's like living in a morbid sculpture garden, except the sculptures used to ask you for bread. Let's talk about what happens when someone dies during plague winter. In normal times, remember those, a death would trigger a well-established procedure. The body would be washed, wrapped in a shroud, laid out respectfully, and buried within a day or two with proper ceremony. Family would mourn. The priest would say words. The community would gather. It was sad but dignified. Now bodies are a logistical nightmare that nobody has the resources or energy to properly address. Your neighbour Agnes died 3 days ago. You know this because you heard her daughter wailing, and then the wailing stopped, and then silence. The body is still in their house because her daughter is too weak to move it and too scared to touch it. Is it plague? Probably. Does touching a plague corpse spread plague? Nobody knows for sure, but everyone suspects yes. So Agnes stays where she died, frozen in her bed, while her daughter huddles in the corner of the same room, unable to leave, unable to move her mother, slowly losing her mind. The bodies outside are worse. Some people died while trying to get help, collapsing in the street or on their doorsteps. Winter hit, they froze solid, and there they remain. You've got old William frozen mid-crawl about 15 feet from his front door, one hand outstretched like he's reaching for something. There's the baker's wife slumped against the wall of the church, covered in a thin layer of snow that makes her look almost peaceful until you get close enough to see her face. There's a child, you don't know whose anymore, curled up near the well, small and still, like they just decided to take a nap in the snow and never woke up. These frozen corpses become landmarks. You give directions based on them. Turn left at Frozen William, go past the baker's wife, and our house is just beyond the dead child. It's horrifying and practical in equal measure. The bodies aren't going anywhere. They might as well be useful. Some of them have been there so long they're covered in snow and ice, transformed into lumpy, human-shaped mounds that you instinctively step over without thinking. The smell is mercifully minimal. Cold preserves bodies, preventing the rapid decomposition that would normally occur. This is simultaneously a blessing and a curse. Blessing. Your village doesn't reek of rotting flesh. Curse. The bodies aren't going away. They're just accumulating like the world's most depressing collection. Every new death adds another permanent fixture to the village landscape. By midwinter, you're navigating an obstacle course of frozen corpses, and you've become so desensitized that you barely notice anymore. Children are taught not to play near the bodies, which is a sentence that should never have to be said, but here we are. Little ones don't fully understand death yet. They see the frozen shapes and get curious. You catch your nephew poking at William's outstretched hand with a stick, and you have to explain again that these aren't toys or decorations. They're people who died, and we can't bury them yet, and please stop touching the plague corpses. Medieval parenting during plague winter requires addressing situations that no guidebook covers. Some bodies are half buried in snow, creating a horrifying surprise for anyone who doesn't watch where they're walking. You're trudging through the village, focused on not slipping, and suddenly you step on something that's definitely not ground. It's a frozen hand, or a shoulder, or God forbid a face. You jump back, your heart racing, and you have to take a moment to recover from the psychological trauma of stepping on your dead neighbour. This happens more often than you'd think. The village has become a minefield of frozen corpses wearing snow camouflage. The church has become a morgue by default. People drag bodies there, hoping the priest will handle burial, but the priest is overwhelmed, possibly dying himself, and definitely not equipped to deal with dozens of corpses. The church porch is stacked with frozen bodies like cordwood. Someone had the bright idea to organise them neatly, which lasted until more bodies arrived than could fit neatly, and now it's just a pile. A frozen pile of your former neighbours, stacked outside God's house like a very dark joke about divine mercy. Dogs are a problem. Village dogs, now masterless because their owners died, have turned semi-feral. They're hungry. The frozen corpses are food. You've caught dogs gnawing on bodies multiple times. It's disturbing on every level. You try to chase the dogs away, but they're desperate, and honestly, you understand. Everything's desperate. The dogs just have fewer moral qualms about their food sources. Still, watching a dog drag away someone's frozen arm is an image that will haunt your nightmares forever, assuming you live long enough to have a forever. Rats are equally opportunistic. They can't eat frozen flesh, but they wait. They nest near bodies, patient and creepy, watching with their beady little eyes. When there's a brief thaw, because even plague winter has temperature fluctuations, the rats swarm. You've seen 20 rats on a single corpse, fighting over the softer parts. It's a scene from hell. You throw rocks at them, screaming, trying to maintain some shred of dignity for the dead, but the rats just scatter briefly before returning. They're winning this war, they know it, you know it. The ethical debates about body handling are exhausting. Should you risk disease by moving bodies? Should you burn them, which some say prevents plague spread but also requires massive amounts of fuel you don't have? Should you just leave them frozen until spring? There's no good answer. Different households make different choices. Some families haul their dead to the church despite the risks. Others pile them outside their own homes, creating personal mausoleums. A few desperate souls try to burn their dead, creating smoky pyres that smell horrible, and don't burn completely because bodies are wet and frozen and don't want to combust. You've developed a relationship with death that's uncomfortably casual. You see a new body and think, oh, there's another one, with the same emotional weight as noticing it's snowing again. Death has become weather. It's a condition you live with, constant and unavoidable. You step over corpses to get to the well. You walk past bodies to reach your house. You've stopped learning the names of people who die because there are too many, and you're too tired, and what's the point anyway? Some of the frozen faces are people you knew well. Your cousin, your childhood friend, the woman who used to sell eggs. They're frozen mid-expression, whatever emotion they were feeling in their final moments locked onto their faces forever. Terror, pain, resignation, confusion, it's all there, preserved in ice. Looking at these faces is looking directly at death's work, and it's harder than looking at the anonymous snow-covered lumps. So mostly you avoid looking at faces, you just navigate around the body-shaped obstacles and try not to think about who they used to be. Nights are especially bad. The frozen bodies cast weird shadows in moonlight. Shapes that used to be human look monstrous in silhouette. Every time you venture outside after dark, to relieve yourself or check on something, you're walking through a landscape populated by the frozen dead. Your imagination runs wild. Are they moving? Did that one just shift position? Obviously not, they're frozen solid, but your fear-soaked brain isn't interested in logic. Every creaking sound, every shadow becomes a potential corpse reanimating. You're living in a horror story, and the monsters are just your dead neighbours being dead at you. The psychological weight of living among corpses is crushing. You can't grieve properly because there are too many dead, and grief requires emotional energy you don't have. You can't avoid them because they're everywhere. You can't process the trauma because you're still in the trauma. It's ongoing with no end in sight. The frozen bodies become a constant reminder that you could be next. Maybe tomorrow, maybe tonight, maybe you're already infected and just don't know it yet. Religious interpretations vary. Some people see the frozen corpses as divine punishment, God's wrath made visible. These folks pray louder, flagellate themselves, and generally make everything more intense and uncomfortable for everyone. Others see it as proof that God has abandoned the world entirely, which is honestly more depressing but arguably more logical given the circumstances. A few optimists suggest that freezing the bodies is actually God's mercy, preventing disease spread and buying time for proper burial in spring. These people are either genuinely faithful or deeply delusional, maybe both. Children's questions are the hardest. Why is Thomas sleeping outside? Because Thomas is dead, and we can't bury him. Why can't we bury him? Because the ground is frozen solid and we don't have the tools or strength. When will we bury him? Spring, maybe, if we're all still alive. Why did Thomas die? Plague. Will I die? Probably. You don't say that last part out loud, but you think it. The honest answer to most children's questions during plague winter is some variation of, because everything is terrible and will likely get worse. Not exactly comforting bedtime material. Some people have stopped caring about the bodies entirely. They've entered a stage of psychological shutdown where corpses are just part of the landscape, no different from rocks or trees. These people step over bodies without flinching, eat meals within sight of the dead, carry on conversations while frozen corpses watch with glassy eyes. It's deeply disturbing, but also a survival mechanism. The human brain can only process so much horror before it starts selectively editing reality. Others become obsessed with the bodies, checking on them daily, talking to them, apologizing for not burying them. These people are one bad day away from complete mental breakdown. You watch your neighbour Martha bring her frozen husband a bowl of soup every morning, setting it beside his corpse like he might eat it. She knows he's dead, but the ritual of caring helps her cope with the guilt of still being alive. You don't judge. Everyone's losing their mind in different ways. At least Martha's coping mechanism is harmless, unlike the people who've started looting the frozen dead for any remaining valuables. Yes, looting happens. Some survivors are desperate enough to rob corpses, removing rings, taking better clothes, searching pockets for coins. It's a new low, even by Plague Winter standards. But desperation does strange things to morality. That ring on frozen William's finger could buy firewood. Those shoes on the baker's wife might actually fit your frostbitten feet. The line between respectful and practical blurs when survival is at stake. You judge the looters, but you also understand. And maybe, in your darkest moments, you've thought about it too. The worst part is knowing this is temporary in the worst way. Spring will come eventually, assuming you survive to see it. When the thaw begins, all these frozen corpses will start decomposing simultaneously. The smell will be apocalyptic. Disease will spread from the rotting bodies. The village will become genuinely uninhabitable. You're living in a frozen time bomb, and the tick of spring's approach is the most terrifying countdown imaginable. So you navigate your village of the frozen dead, stepping over old William, past the baker's wife, around the dead child, heading to your house where at least the corpses inside are family and therefore marginally less disturbing. You try not to think about how normal this has become. You try not to wonder if this is what the end of the world looks like. You try not to imagine joining the frozen sculpture garden yourself. But mostly, you just avoid looking at their faces, because the faces remember. They remember being alive. They remember hope. They remember thinking they'd survive. And you can't afford to remember those things. You can only afford to survive one more day in the village of the frozen dead. The ground is frozen solid. Gravediggers are either dead or too weak to work. Mass graves can't be dug because the earth has turned to stone, so bodies pile up in churches, sheds, or just outside in the snow, waiting for spring thaw like the world's most horrifying time capsule. Let's talk about what burial actually involves in normal circumstances, so you can appreciate just how impossible it's become. Digging a grave is hard work even in optimal conditions. You need to excavate a hole roughly 6 feet deep and 7 feet long. In good soil, with proper tools, this takes 2 strong men about 4 to 6 hours. The grave needs to be deep enough that animals won't dig up the body and shallow enough that you don't hit groundwater. It's a precise operation that requires skill, strength, and tools that aren't broken. Now take that already difficult task and add Plague Winter. The ground has frozen to a depth of 2, 3, sometimes 4 feet. It's not dirt anymore. It's permafrost, as hard as rock, as unyielding as iron. You take a shovel, assuming you have a shovel and not just a broken stick, and you strike the ground. The shovel bounces back. The vibration hurts your hands. You've made exactly 0 progress. You try again. Same result. The earth has decided it's done accepting bodies for the season. Your village gravedigger, old Thomas, who dug every grave for 30 years, is dead. Buried in a grave he dug himself before the plague took him, which seems like the ultimate cosmic joke. His apprentice died next. Now nobody knows the tricks of the trade, the specific angles to attack frozen ground, the precise spots in the churchyard that drain better and freeze less. That institutional knowledge died with them, and you're left with desperate amateurs trying to bury their dead with no idea what they're doing. Some people try anyway. They have to. Cultural and religious pressure demands burial. Leaving bodies above ground feels wrong, sacrilegious, dangerous. So families gather their remaining strength and attack the frozen earth with whatever tools they can find. Picks, shovels, hoes, even cooking implements. They strike the ground over and over, making tiny chips in the frozen surface. After an hour of exhausting work, they've created a depression maybe 3 inches deep. At this rate, a proper grave will take 3 weeks. Nobody has 3 weeks. Nobody has that much strength. They give up, defeated by dirt. The church cemetery becomes the centre of a humanitarian crisis. The priest, if he's still alive and functional, tries to maintain some order. He marks spots for burial, schedules services, attempts to preserve dignity. But reality doesn't care about dignity. The bodies keep coming faster than anyone can process them. The marked burial spots remain empty because nobody can dig them. The carefully planned cemetery layout becomes meaningless when the ground refuses to cooperate. Desperate people try desperate solutions. Some attempt to build funeral pyres, figuring if burial is impossible, cremation is the next best option. This sounds reasonable until you realise that burning a human body completely requires temperatures around 1400 degrees Fahrenheit, sustained for several hours. Your pathetic pile of damp wood in freezing weather might reach a quarter of that on a good day. The result is partial cremation at best. Charred remains, recognisable body parts, an ungodly smell, and massive amounts of wasted firewood. Plus, the Catholic Church officially forbids cremation, so you're possibly damning your loved one's soul while failing to dispose of their body. Win-win. Some villages try to create above-ground storage for bodies until spring. Sheds, barns, even empty houses become impromptu morgues. This works for about a week until the smell becomes unbearable, even in freezing temperatures. Rats move in. The structures become contaminated. People start avoiding entire sections of the village because that's where the body storage is. Eventually, these makeshift morgues are just abandoned, locked up with their grim contents, avoided by everyone until someone braver or more desperate than you decides to deal with it. The church building itself becomes a last resort. Bodies are brought to the church porch, then inside when the porch overflows, then stacked in the nave when there's no more floor space. The church, meant to be a place of spiritual comfort, transforms into a warehouse of the dead. Services become impossible. How do you pray surrounded by dozens of corpses? The priest tries to maintain religious observance, but his voice echoes off stone walls and dead bodies, and everyone's too disturbed to focus on salvation. The living can't worship among the dead. The dead can't rest among the living. Everyone loses. Some families keep their dead at home, unable to face the impossibility of burial, and unwilling to add their loved ones to the chaos at the church. Your neighbour John has had his wife's body in his house for 2 months. She's frozen, propped in the corner, covered with a sheet. John talks to her sometimes. He sets a place for her at meals. He's clearly lost his mind, but who can blame him? Burial is supposed to bring closure. Without it, grief has nowhere to go. It just sits there, frozen, like everything else. The wealthier families, the few who survived and retained some resources, try to bribe or hire labourers to dig graves. They offer money, food, extra firewood, anything. Sometimes they find takers. Desperate people will do almost anything for resources. These hired gravediggers work for hours or days, chipping away at frozen earth, creating shallow graves that are better than nothing but nowhere near proper depth. Bodies go in these inadequate holes, covered with whatever unfrozen dirt can be scraped together, topped with rocks to keep animals out. It's a mockery of proper burial, but it's something. The theological crisis is significant. Christian doctrine is clear about burial. Bodies should be interred in consecrated ground with proper rites. The soul's journey to the afterlife supposedly depends on it. But what happens when proper burial is physically impossible? Are all these unburied dead damned? The priest doesn't have good answers. He mumbles about God's understanding and special circumstances, but nobody's convinced. The spiritual anxiety adds another layer to the already crushing psychological burden. Some people propose waiting until spring for a mass burial event. Just stack the bodies somewhere, preserve them in the cold, and in March or April, when the ground thaws, hold a massive funeral for everyone at once. It's practical, it's efficient, it's also horrifying. The thought of your mother or child being stacked like firewood for months, waiting for a communal grave, feels wrong. But the alternatives are worse. So people reluctantly agree, and the body piles grow, and everyone tries not to think about spring too hard. Different religious groups have different crises. Jews traditionally bury their dead within 24 hours. Impossible now. Muslims have specific washing and burial rituals. Can't happen. Even within Christianity, different traditions clash. Some say the bodies must face east. Others prioritize consecrated ground over direction. None of it matters when you can't bury anyone anyway, but people still argue about it because arguing about details is easier than facing the magnitude of the disaster. Children's bodies present a unique agony. Small bodies should be easier to bury, right? Smaller hole required. But parents can't bring themselves to put their children in the inadequate shallow graves. They can't stack them with other bodies. They can't leave them outside. So children's bodies often stay with families longest, frozen in bedrooms, mourned daily, becoming permanent fixtures of household grief. It's heartbreaking. It's paralyzing. It's one more way plague winter destroys people psychologically, even when it doesn't kill them physically. Predation becomes a real concern. Animals are hungry too. Wolves, normally wary of human settlements, become bolder. They can smell death even through ice. Packs circle the village at night, looking for easy meals. The stacked bodies, the shallow graves, even the corpses inside the church, all vulnerable. You hear howling in the darkness and know they're out there, waiting. Some mornings reveal evidence of nocturnal raids. Bodies moved, gnawed, partially devoured. You try to protect the dead, but how? You can barely protect the living. The gravedigger's tools become precious relics. A good shovel, a proper pick, any implement capable of breaking frozen ground. These are worth their weight in gold. Families guard their tools jealously. Lending a shovel becomes a major negotiation. Someone has to stay with the tool at all times to ensure it's returned. Tool theft becomes common. Your spade might mean your family gets a proper grave while others are stacked like cordwood. Survival and respect for the dead now depend on who owns the best shovel. This is where we've arrived. Some desperate souls try supernatural solutions. They hold rituals hoping to soften the earth. They pray for divine intervention. They scatter holy water on frozen ground, expecting miracles. These attempts fail, obviously, because magic isn't real, and God appears to have left the building. But the attempts continue because what else can people do? Accept that the earth itself has rejected their dead? That's too philosophically devastating. Better to believe that enough prayer might work, even when it clearly won't. The few successful burials become community events. When someone actually manages to dig a proper grave, maybe they found a spot near the church that drains better, maybe they just worked harder than anyone thought possible, everyone comes to watch. Not just to mourn, but to witness that burial is still possible, that civilization hasn't completely collapsed, that there's still some way to honour the dead properly. These rare burials give hope, which lasts until the next person dies, and the ground is still frozen, and the whole impossible cycle begins again. Engineers and practical thinkers propose solutions. What if we build burial cairns, covering bodies with stones instead of earth? What if we create raised structures? What if we use fire to thaw small sections of ground? Some of these ideas are tried. Most fail. The ones that partially succeed are too labour-intensive to scale. You can't build a stone cairn for every corpse when you're starving and exhausted. 1 or 2 special burials might get this treatment. The rest wait for spring. The waiting list of dead grows longer. Families mark their deceased with names, dates, anything to maintain identity. But snow covers the markers. Winds blow them away. By midwinter, some bodies are anonymous. Nobody remembers whose child that is or which household that woman belonged to. They've become generic dead, awaiting generic burial. Their individual stories lost to cold and time. This anonymity feels like a second death, an erasure worse than the first. And through it all, you know that spring will bring its own nightmare. When the ground finally thaws, there will be hundreds of bodies waiting for burial. The earth will be soft, yes, but it will reek. Disease will explode. The labour required will be staggering. You'll have to dig mass graves, pile in bodies that have been decomposing for months, and try not to vomit or contract plague or lose your mind entirely. So the bodies pile up. The ground stays frozen. The gravediggers stay dead. And somewhere in the pile of ecclesiastical corpses and backyard body stacks and frozen churchyard sculptures, your civilization's promise to honour its dead dies too. waiting for a thaw that might kill everyone who survived the winter. The earth fights back, the earth wins, and you're left standing in a cemetery full of empty holes you couldn't dig and full of bodies you couldn't bury, wondering what kind of God designed a world where even death can't find rest. The church bells never stop ringing. Priests are dying faster than they can be replaced. The rituals that once brought comfort now feel hollow, because everyone knows God seems to have left the building, but you still show up, shivering and praying, because what else is there? Let's start with those bells. In normal times, church bells mark the rhythm of village life. Morning prayers, noon, evening vespers, special occasions. They were comforting, structured, a reminder that God was watching and time was moving forward. Now the bells ring constantly for the dead. Every death requires a toll. In a village of 300 people that's lost a third of its population, that's 100 deaths, 100 bell tollings. The sound that once meant community and faith now means only one thing. Someone else is gone. The bell ringer is exhausted. He's one of the few survivors with enough strength to climb the tower and pull the ropes. His hands are blistered and bleeding from the constant work. He climbs those narrow stone steps multiple times a day in freezing cold to ring out another death announcement. Sometimes he's ringing for people he knew, sometimes for people he loved. Sometimes he just rings and cries and rings some more, and nobody can hear him sobbing over the sound of the bells. Eventually he stops ringing for every death. There are too many. The bells toll at dawn for everyone who died overnight, a single communal announcement. This is more efficient but also more devastating because now you're hearing multiple people died instead of one person died, and the scale of loss becomes impossible to ignore. Your priest, Father Benedict, is a shell of himself. Before the plague he was robust, cheerful, always ready with a blessing or a gentle lecture about sin. Now he's gaunt, hollow-eyed, moving through services like a ghost. He's performed last rites so many times the words have lost meaning. He's blessed the dying, comforted the grieving, and watched his efforts fail over and over. He's seen children die, mothers die, entire families die. And still, people come to him expecting hope, comfort, answers. He has none. He's running on fumes and obligation. The church building itself has become a nightmare. Remember how it's serving as a morgue? The smell has permeated the stone walls. Incense helps, but not much. You can't mask the scent of dozens of bodies with some burning herbs. The pews are half empty, more than half empty, and getting emptier by the week. The people who do attend are spaced out, terrified of contagion, eyeing each other suspiciously. Is that person coughing? Does she look feverish? Are we all going to catch plague just by sharing this space? Services have become surreal. Father Benedict stands at the altar, wrapped in every ecclesiastical garment he owns because the church is freezing, and he recites prayers while corpses line the walls. You're supposed to focus on salvation and God's mercy, but your knees are numb from kneeling on frozen stone. Your stomach is growling, and the woman beside you is clearly developing buboes on her neck. Spiritual transcendence is hard to achieve when you're mainly wondering if you'll survive the next hour. The theology is cracking. Medieval Christianity taught that suffering could be redemptive, that God tested his faithful, that saints endured martyrdom with joy. But this isn't noble suffering. This is random, brutal, indiscriminate death. Babies die. Priests die. The devout and the sinful die at the same rate. Where's the divine plan? Where's the justice? Father Benedict preaches about God's mysterious ways, but even he sounds unconvinced. His sermons grow shorter, vaguer, more desperate. He's losing his faith in real time, and everyone can see it. Confession becomes darkly comic. People confess to sins that are laughably minor compared to the apocalypse happening outside. Forgive me, Father, for I thought ill of my neighbour. Your neighbour is dead, and you stole his firewood, but sure, let's focus on your uncharitable thoughts. I took the Lord's name in vain. Father Benedict barely reacts. He's heard confessions of looting, abandonment, even murder in the past few months. Mild cursing doesn't even register anymore. He assigns penance automatically, a few prayers, done, and moves on. The confessional has become a formality that nobody has energy for but everyone maintains because structure is all that's left. Communion is a special kind of stress, You're supposed to share the communion cup, drinking wine that represents Christ's blood, except you're in the middle of a plague outbreak and everyone's putting their diseased mouths on the same cup. Some priests have started wiping the rim between communicants. Others have given up and just let everyone drink from the shared vessel, figuring if God wants you dead, a cup won't save you. You approach the altar, take the cup with shaking hands, put your lips where dozens of potentially infected lips have been, drink, and try not to think about what you've just done. This is supposed to be a sacred moment. It feels more like Russian roulette with a chalice. The sacraments for the dying have increased exponentially. Last rites used to be rare, solemn occasions. Now Father Benedict performs them multiple times daily. He's developed a streamlined version out of necessity. The full ritual takes too long, and there are too many dying people. Now it's a brief prayer, a quick blessing, a sign of the cross. Done. Next patient. He moves through homes like a medieval emergency responder, offering what comfort he can, which isn't much. Some people die while he's still walking to their house. Some die before he finishes the ritual. The timing is brutal and random. Baptisms have become desperate affairs. Parents want their babies baptized immediately, terrified that death will come before salvation. Infants are brought to the church within hours of birth, sometimes still bloody from delivery, because waiting even a day feels too risky. Father Benedict baptizes them quickly, efficiently, and tries not to think about how many of these babies will be dead within weeks. The baptismal font has become a revolving door of hope and impending loss. Marriages have essentially stopped. Who wants to get married during plague winter? Who can think about celebration and future planning when everyone's focused on surviving today? The few weddings that do occur are grim, practical affairs. Two survivors deciding that shared resources and body heat are better than facing this alone. No joy, no festivity. Just two exhausted people mumbling vows while Father Benedict rushes through the ceremony because someone's dying across the village and needs last rites. The church's financial situation is collapsing. Tithes were mandatory. 10% of everyone's income or produce went to the church. But with half the population dead and the survivors starving, the money and goods have dried up. The church had reserves, but those are gone, distributed to the desperate or stolen by desperate people. Father Benedict has sold church silver to buy food for orphans. The building's roof needs repair, but there's no money and no roofers. Water leaks in during snow melts, damaging the altar, the communion table, everything. The physical church is deteriorating as fast as the spiritual one. Saints and relics, once sources of comfort and miracle stories, now feel like empty promises. Your village has a supposed fragment of St. Catherine's veil, kept in a special reliquary, believed to protect the faithful. It didn't protect anyone. Half the village died anyway. The relic sits in its box, beautiful and useless, a reminder that maybe the saints aren't listening or can't help, or never could. People still venerate it out of habit, but the devotion is hollow. They're going through motions because the alternative, accepting that there's no supernatural help coming, is too terrifying. Prayer has become mechanical. You recite the words you've known since childhood, but they don't mean anything anymore. Our Father, who art in heaven, is he though? Because it really seems like he left. Give us this day our daily bread. He's not, we're starving. Deliver us from evil. He didn't. Evil is winning spectacularly. But you keep praying because what else can you do? Prayer is free, requires no resources, and gives your desperate hopes somewhere to go, even if it goes nowhere. The theological debates that used to fascinate medieval scholars now seem absurd. Is this plague punishment for sin? If so, which sins? Everyone sins. Specific sins? Why are babies being punished? They haven't sinned yet. Is it a test of faith? What kind of test kills the most faithful along with the sinners? Is it just random? But randomness implies God isn't in control, which is heresy. But the alternative is that God is deliberately killing everyone, which is worse. Some people turn to extreme religiosity, becoming flagellants. These groups travel from village to village, whipping themselves bloody, believing that physical suffering will appease God's anger. They arrive in your village, parade through the streets, crying out about sin and redemption, leaving trails of blood in the snow. They're terrifying and pathetic simultaneously. Father Benedict disapproves. The church officially condemns flagellants, but he's too tired to stop them. They do their bloody theatre, draw crowds of desperate onlookers, then move on to the next village, leaving everyone more traumatised than before. Others go the opposite direction, abandoning faith entirely. You hear whispers of people who've stopped attending services, stopped praying, stopped pretending that God matters. The church calls this heresy, threatens eternal damnation, but those threats ring hollow when everyone's already living in hell. Some of these apostates are surprisingly happy. At least they're not wasting energy on prayers that don't work. They've accepted the randomness of death and decided to spend their remaining time on practical survival instead of spiritual performance. Children's faith is especially heartbreaking. They still believe in a loving God who cares about them. They pray with pure hearts, asking God to save their parents, stop the plague, make everything better. Their prayers aren't answered. You watch their faith slowly crumble as they realize that praying doesn't help, that God isn't listening, that they're alone in a cold, dying world. Some maintain faith through sheer stubbornness. Others become cynical at age 7, which is its own tragedy. The church calendar continues despite everything. Advent, Christmas, Epiphany. The feast days come and go. Christmas 1348 is the bleakest in living memory. The church is half full of corpses and half full of dying people. Father Benedict leads service, his voice cracking as he speaks of peace on earth and goodwill toward men, while everyone knows there's neither peace nor goodwill, just plague and cold and death. The nativity story, a baby born in a stable bringing hope to the world, feels like mockery when babies are dying in droves and hope is in shorter supply than firewood. Easter will be even worse. The resurrection story, Christ defeating death, offering eternal life. It'll all sound like cruel jokes while bodies pile up awaiting burial. How do you celebrate victory over death during a plague that proves death's absolute dominion? But you'll attend anyway. You'll participate in the rituals. You'll take communion from the shared cup. You'll pray the prayers, not because you believe, but because the church is the only institution still functioning, the only place that offers any structure to the chaos. Father Benedict knows his flock is losing faith. He can see it in their eyes, hear it in their prayers. They're going through motions, keeping up appearances, but the core belief is eroding. He doesn't blame them. His own faith is barely clinging on. But he keeps performing services, keeps offering sacraments, keeps ringing the bells, because what else can he do? He's a priest. This is his job. Even if God has left the building, someone needs to maintain the building until he maybe comes back. So you sit in the freezing church, surrounded by corpses and dying neighbours, listening to a priest who's lost his faith try to convince you that God loves you and has a plan. You don't believe him. He doesn't believe himself. But you all play along because the alternative, admitting that there's no divine plan, no loving God, no ultimate meaning to this suffering, is too devastating to face. The church is your only hope. Your only hope is failing. But you keep showing up, shivering and praying, because at least it's something. At least it's structure. At least when you're in church, you can pretend for an hour that someone's in charge, that this all means something, that death isn't just random chaos destroying everything you love. The bells ring again. Someone else has died. Father Benedict rises wearily to perform last rites. You remain in your pew, numb and cold, wondering how many more bell tolls you'll hear before it's your turn. The answer? Probably too many. If you get sick in plague winter, you have 3 options: freeze to death, burn up with fever, or submit yourself to a doctor whose idea of treatment involves bloodletting, bad smells, and theological advice. Spoiler, none of these options end well. Let's talk about medieval medical theory, which is spectacularly wrong in ways that would be funny if they weren't actively killing people. The dominant medical framework is the theory of humours, inherited from ancient Greek physician Galen. According to this theory, your body contains 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health means these humours are balanced. Sickness means they're out of balance. The cure? Rebalance them through bloodletting, purging, or various other interventions that definitely don't work and probably make everything worse. Your village doctor, if he's still alive, which is a big if because doctors have been dying at impressive rates from close contact with plague patients, diagnoses you based on this humour theory. You're running a high fever, that's too much blood. The treatment is obvious. Remove some blood. You're coughing up phlegm, too much phlegm in your system. The cure involves making you vomit and giving you herbs that induce more coughing to expel the excess. You see the problem here. The symptoms are treated as the disease itself, and the treatments often just intensify your suffering. Bloodletting is the Swiss Army knife of medieval medicine. Got a headache? Bloodletting. Plague symptoms? Definitely bloodletting. Broken leg? Believe it or not, bloodletting. The doctor arrives at your freezing house with his leather case of tools, including several small knives called lancets and a jar full of leeches. Yes, leeches, live ones, writhing, hungry, ready to suck your blood for medical purposes. The bloodletting process is exactly as horrible as it sounds. The doctor identifies a vein, usually in your arm or sometimes your neck, and makes a cut with a lancet that hasn't been cleaned since the last patient. Blood flows out into a bowl. The doctor watches it drain, judging by eye when you've lost enough, which is somewhere between a concerning amount and potentially fatal amount. There's no measuring, it's vibes-based medicine. When he feels satisfied, he bandages the wound with a cloth that's probably contaminated with everyone else's diseases and calls it a day. The leech option is similar but slower and psychologically worse. The doctor places leeches on your skin, usually near the area of complaint. The leeches attach with their gross little sucker mouths and begin feeding. You can feel them swelling with your blood. It's disgusting, it's disturbing, and it's considered advanced medical care. The leeches fall off when they're full, bloated and satisfied, and you're left with multiple bleeding wounds and significantly less blood than you started with. The doctor collects his fee and leaves, confident he's helped. He hasn't. Here's the thing about bloodletting during plague winter. You're already weakened from malnutrition, cold, and stress. Your body is desperately trying to fight off infection. Removing blood removes the very thing your body needs. Red blood cells carrying oxygen, white blood cells fighting disease. Bloodletting doesn't rebalance your humours. It just makes you weaker. Many patients die not from their original illness, but from the treatment itself. Medieval medicine is basically speedrunning your death while charging you for the privilege. The plague has physicians completely stumped. Nobody knows what causes it. Germ theory won't be discovered for another 500 years. The prevailing theory is miasma, bad air. Doctors believe plague spreads through corrupted atmosphere, foul smells and evil vapours. This is why plague doctors wear those famous beaked masks stuffed with herbs and flowers. They think the good smells will protect them from the bad air. Spoiler, they don't. The masks actually help a bit by creating a barrier, but not for the reasons medieval doctors think. The treatments for plague are creative and useless. Doctors prescribe sitting near fires to purify the air around you, which sounds nice until you remember that sitting near fire in a freezing house is just basic winter survival, not medical treatment. They recommend carrying flowers or herbs to smell constantly, which does nothing for plague but at least makes you smell better than your usual medieval stench. They suggest avoiding bathing because it opens the pores and lets disease in, which means plague patients are also unwashed plague patients, combining contagion with horrific body odour. Some doctors prescribe amulets and charms. These might contain arsenic, poisonous, mercury, also poisonous, or dried toad, not poisonous but definitely useless. You're supposed to wear these around your neck to ward off plague. They work exactly as well as you'd expect, which is to say not at all. But they're expensive, so doctors keep selling them because medieval medicine is as much about profit as it is about healing. Actually, scratch that. It's more about profit. Dietary advice is everywhere and contradictory. One doctor says eat only boiled foods. Another insists on raw vegetables. A third recommends fasting to cleanse the system. A fourth says eat as much as possible to build strength. Nobody agrees on anything except that you should definitely pay them for their advice. You're sick, confused, and now also following a diet plan that makes no sense and probably accelerates your demise. Urine examination is considered peak diagnostic technology. Doctors inspect your pee's colour, smell and clarity to determine what's wrong with you. Dark urine means too much black bile. Clear urine means too much phlegm. Cloudy urine means something else. they're not entirely sure. The doctor swirls your urine in a flask, holds it up to the light like he's a sommelier judging wine, and makes pronouncements about your humoral balance based on your peas bouquet. It's pseudoscience at its finest. At least it's non-invasive, which is more than can be said for most medieval medical procedures. Cauterization is another favourite treatment. Got a wound? Burn it closed with a red-hot iron. Developing buboes from plague? Burn those too. The logic is that fire purifies, killing bad humours and sealing wounds. The reality is excruciating pain, severe burns, and infection from non-sterile irons used on multiple patients. But at least it's dramatic. Medieval medicine might not work, but it's theatrical. Herbal remedies are everywhere, ranging from might actually help a little to definitely poisonous. Willow bark tea for pain actually works because it contains salicylic acid, the precursor to aspirin. But doctors also prescribe hemlock, nightshade, and various other toxic plants for conditions they don't understand. Some patients die from their illness, some die from their medication. It's a toss-up. Women's medical knowledge is often more practical than doctors' theoretical nonsense. Midwives, herbalists, and village-wise women know remedies passed down through generations. They understand which plants help with fever, which ease pain, which are dangerous. But during plague winter, even their knowledge fails. Nothing in their herbal arsenal can touch plague. They watch their remedies fail over and over, their reputations crumbling along with their patients' health. Surgery is a last resort and often a death sentence. The barber surgeon, yes, the same person who cuts your hair also performs surgery, has tools that include saws, knives, hooks and forceps, none of them clean. Anesthesia consists of getting you drunk and maybe hitting you in the head to knock you unconscious. The surgery itself, whether it's amputating a frostbitten limb or draining an abscess, is performed without any concept of sterilization. The barber surgeon's hands are dirty. His tools are dirty. The surface he operates on is dirty. Infection is virtually guaranteed. Post-surgical care is go home and hope you don't die. There's no follow-up, no antibiotics, no wound monitoring. You're sent home with your fresh surgical wound, told to keep it clean, impossible, and left to fate. Most surgical patients die within days from infection. The few who survive are considered medical miracles, which they are, but not because of the surgery, despite it. Pain management is primitive. The main options are alcohol, opium if you're wealthy, and suffering. Most people choose suffering because alcohol and opium are expensive and in short supply. You endure broken bones, burns, infections and disease with gritted teeth and prayers. Pain is just part of life. Medieval people have incredible pain tolerance, not by choice but by necessity. There's no alternative. The plague has created a crisis of medical confidence. Doctors who once spoke authoritatively about humours and treatments now hedge their pronouncements. This might help. We can try this. Perhaps if they're realising their entire medical framework is useless against plague, but they can't admit it outright because that would mean admitting they've been wrong about everything. So they keep bloodletting, keep prescribing useless remedies, keep collecting fees, and keep watching patients die. Some doctors have fled entirely. They realised early that close contact with plague patients was fatal and decided that self-preservation trumped professional duty. These doctors packed up and left for the countryside, abandoning their practices and patients. You can't really blame them. Why stay and die when you can leave and maybe survive? But their absence means fewer medical practitioners, even terrible ones, for the people who remain. The doctors who stayed are either brave, foolish, or so committed to their professional identity that they can't imagine being anything else. They go from house to house, seeing patient after patient, breathing the same air, touching the same bodies, collecting the same fees. Many of them die. Some survive through sheer luck. None of them cure anyone. Quarantine is one of the few medical interventions that actually works, sort of. Authorities are starting to implement isolation for sick households, locking families inside, marking doors with red crosses, leaving food outside if they remember. It's brutal and imperfect, but it does slow disease spread. Of course, it also condemns entire families to die together in isolation, which is its own horror. But from a public health perspective, it's more effective than anything else medieval medicine offers. The psychological impact of medical failure is devastating. When the doctor comes to your house, everyone knows it's probably the last time you'll see the patient alive. The doctor's visit isn't hope, it's confirmation that death is imminent. Children start crying when the doctor arrives. Patients beg not to be treated because they know the treatment might kill them faster than the disease. Medical care has become synonymous with death. Religious healing competes with medical treatment. Priests offer prayers, blessings, and relics. Sometimes these seem to work, probably because the patient was going to recover anyway, and people attribute the survival to divine intervention rather than luck. Other times, prayer fails spectacularly, and the patient dies while clutching their holy relic, which raises uncomfortable theological questions that everyone tries not to think about. By winter 1349, medical care has essentially collapsed. The few remaining doctors are overwhelmed, exhausted, and out of ideas. Patients have stopped seeking treatment because treatment doesn't work. People die at home, untreated, because what's the point? At least dying without medical intervention means you keep your blood inside your body and avoid leeches. So when you develop a fever in plague winter, your options are indeed limited and terrible. You can freeze to death in your unheated house while your body tries to fight infection. You can burn up with fever while wrapped in every blanket you own. Or you can call the doctor and let him drain your blood, apply leeches, prescribe poisonous herbs, and charge you money for hastening your death. Most people choose option 1 or 2. At least those deaths are free. At least you die with your blood where it belongs. At least your final moments aren't spent watching leeches swell with the life force you desperately need to survive. Medieval medicine isn't just ineffective, it's actively harmful, confidently incorrect and expensive. It's a system that kills people while claiming to heal them, charges them for the privilege, and then blames the patient's humoral imbalance when treatment fails. So here you are, feverish and coughing, deciding whether to suffer alone or pay someone to make your suffering worse. Either way, you're probably going to die. But at least if you skip the doctor, you'll die with dignity, your blood still inside you, and a few coins left for your family to buy firewood. That's the best medical outcome you can hope for in plague winter. Dying on your own terms, unhelped by the people who claim they can help. If your household shows signs of plague, you're locked inside. A red cross is painted on your door. Food is left on your doorstep if you're lucky. If you're not, you're simply forgotten. You're trapped in a freezing house with dying relatives and no way out. It's solitary confinement, medieval edition. The system works like this. Someone in your household develops symptoms. Maybe it's your mother coughing up blood. Maybe it's your son with swollen lymph nodes. Maybe it's you, feeling the first fever creeping in. A neighbour notices. Or maybe someone reports you. There are always informants, people hoping that pointing out others' sickness will somehow protect them. Word reaches the village authorities, which in plague winter means whoever's still alive and willing to make decisions. Usually it's the bailiff or the reeve, assuming they haven't died or fled. The enforcers arrive at your door. These are men you've known your whole life, your neighbour John, the blacksmith's son. They're not soldiers or police. They're just terrified people doing a terrible job because someone has to. They tell you that your household is under quarantine. You have plague, or someone in your house does, and you're all considered infected now. You're not allowed to leave. Not for any reason. Not for food, water, firewood, nothing. You're sealed inside for 40 days, hence quarantine, from the Italian for 40, or until everyone inside is dead. Whichever comes first, they nail boards across your door. Actual boards, with actual nails, sealing you inside your own home. The sound of hammering is final, absolute. Each strike of the hammer is another layer between you and the world. You're being buried alive, just vertically. Your house has become your tomb and you're not even dead yet. The enforcers work quickly, avoiding eye contact, probably holding cloth over their mouths. They don't want to breathe your plague air. They don't want to acknowledge that they're condemning you. Then comes the mark. A red cross is painted on your door, bright and bold, visible from a distance. Sometimes they add the words, "Lord have mercy," which would be touching if it weren't a sign that everyone's given up on you. The cross serves multiple purposes. It warns others to stay away, it marks your house as plague-infected, and it brands your family with the scarlet letter of disease. You're no longer people with names, you're the plague house, the Red Cross house, the place everyone avoids. From inside you watch through the cracks as the enforcers finish their work and leave. They walk away quickly, relieved to be done. You hear their footsteps fade, and then silence. You're alone now, truly alone. in a way that's hard to describe. You're surrounded by your family, but you're cut off from humanity. The world continues outside, people talking, working, living, and you're on the other side of a wall that might as well be made of iron. The first day is shock. You can't quite believe this is happening. You test the door, pushing against the boards. They don't budge. You look through the small window opening, seeing the village continuing without you. You're right there, 15 feet from your neighbour's house. But you might as well be on the moon. Your children cry. Your spouse stares blankly. Everyone's processing the same terrible realization. We might all die in here. Food is promised. The authorities say they'll leave rations at your door daily. Bread, maybe some vegetables, water if you're lucky. This promise is mostly lies. The first day, nothing comes. The second day, a small loaf of bread appears, barely enough for one person, let alone a family. The third day, nothing again. The pattern becomes clear. You're not really being fed. You're being forgotten. The people outside have their own problems. They're fighting their own survival battles. Your Red Cross house is out of sight, out of mind. You ration what food you had before quarantine began. That half loaf of bread, those turnips in the cellar, you make it stretch. But it's not enough. Within a week, you're hungry. Within 2 weeks, you're starving. Your children beg for food you don't have. You'd give them your portions, but your portions are already nothing. The cruelty of quarantine isn't just the isolation. It's the starvation. You're not dying from plague, at least not yet. You're dying from neglect. Water is worse. You need water to survive, especially if people are feverish. But you can't leave to get it from the well. If you had water stored before quarantine, great. That might last a few days. Then you're drinking melted snow that you catch through the window opening, or rainwater collected in a bucket, or nothing. Dehydration sets in. Lips crack. Urine darkens. Thinking becomes fuzzy. You're being slowly desiccated inside your own home. Firewood runs out fast. You burn everything you can. Furniture goes first. That chair you inherited from your grandfather. Firewood. The table you ate meals on. Firewood. Your children's wooden toys. Into the flames. You're dismantling your home from the inside, burning your life to stay warm a few hours longer. Eventually you run out of things to burn. The fire dies. The cold returns. And you're huddled together in the dark, freezing, because the alternative is burning the walls or roof, which would just create different problems. The sickness progresses. Maybe your mother dies first. Her fever spikes. She becomes delirious, and one night she just stops breathing. You're sitting next to a corpse now. You can't bury her. You can't even move her outside. She stays in the house, freezing in place, another piece of furniture in your plague prison. Your children ask when Grandma will wake up. You don't have good answers. You move her body to the corner, cover it with a blanket, and try not to look at it. Then your son gets sick. He develops buboes, those telltale swellings in the neck and groin. He's in agony. He's burning with fever, crying, begging you to make it stop. You have no medicine, no treatment, no way to ease his suffering. You hold him while he writhes in pain. You whisper useless comfort. You promise things will get better, knowing they won't. He dies in your arms 3 days later. Now you have 2 bodies. The house smells of death. You're living in a frozen morgue, and you're probably next. The psychological torture is exquisite. You can hear life continuing outside, voices, footsteps, church bells. The village goes on without you. People walk past your house, giving it a wide berth, crossing themselves, hurrying by. You want to call out to them, beg for help, but the Red Cross on your door has made you untouchable. You're diseased, dangerous, already dead in everyone's estimation. Nobody's coming to save you. Time becomes meaningless. You've been locked in for a week, 2 weeks, 3. You've lost count. Days blend together. Wake up, ration food, try to stay warm, watch family members die, sleep, repeat. There's no variation, no hope for change. You're stuck in a loop of suffering that only ends when everyone inside is dead or the 40 days have passed. Most households don't make it to 40 days. Some people try to escape. They pry at the boards on the door, or they try to squeeze through the window opening. Sometimes they succeed in getting out, but the village response is brutal. Escaped quarantine violators are caught and beaten, sometimes killed. Their threats to public health, plague carriers walking freely. The community can't allow it. So escapees are made examples of, their bodies left in the street as warnings. Stay in your plague house or die in the street. Your choice. Others embrace escape through death. The desperation becomes too much. The hunger, the cold, the isolation, watching family die, knowing you're next. Some people just give up. Stop eating the meagre rations. Stop trying to stay warm. Some take more active measures, though medieval religion forbids suicide as mortal sin. But what's eternal damnation compared to ending the immediate suffering? Some people decide hell can't be worse than this. Children suffer uniquely in quarantine. They don't understand why they can't go outside. They don't grasp the permanence of death when siblings or parents die. They just know they're hungry, cold, scared, and trapped. They cry constantly in the early days. Then they stop crying, which is worse. They become listless, sitting silently, staring at nothing. You watch your children shut down mentally and emotionally, and there's nothing you can do. You're failing them as a parent, not through any fault of your own, but through a system that's condemned entire families to slow death. The guilt is crushing. If you're the person who showed symptoms first, you know you've killed your family. Your infection has sealed everyone's fate. They're dying because of you. This guilt follows you to your own grave, assuming you live long enough to feel it. If you're the healthy one watching infected family die, you feel guilty for staying healthy. Why are you surviving when they're dying? Why them and not you? There's no good position in quarantine. Every role comes with unbearable psychological weight. Occasionally, rarely, a household survives quarantine. Everyone either recovers or never gets sick. After 40 days, the boards are removed. You stumble out, blinking in daylight, weak from starvation, traumatized beyond words. The village treats you with suspicion. You survived plague? Are you sure you're not still contagious? Are you cursed, blessed, dangerous? You're never quite accepted back into the community. You're the plague survivors, marked forever by what you endured. But most households don't survive. The boards stay up for weeks after everyone inside is dead. Eventually someone notices the silence. No sounds from the house. No faces at the window. The enforcers return, remove the boards, and find a family of corpses. Maybe they died from plague. Maybe from starvation. Maybe from cold. Does it matter? They're dead. And the quarantine system killed them as surely as the disease did. The bodies are removed. Well, sometimes. If there are resources and people to do it. Otherwise, the house is just sealed back up, this time permanently. It becomes a tomb, a monument to failed public health policy. The red cross fades on the door. Snow covers everything. The house slowly collapses, and eventually everyone forgets that a family lived there, loved there, died there, trapped and abandoned. Quarantine in plague winter is theoretically sound. Isolate the sick to protect the healthy. It makes logical sense. But the execution is barbaric. It's death by bureaucracy. It's murder by policy. It's telling people, stay in your house and die so the rest of us don't have to, and then pretending it's for the greater good. The greater good? What a concept. Your family has been sacrificed to the greater good. Your children starved for the greater good. You've been locked in a freezing house to die slowly for the greater good. And when you're all dead, the community will pat itself on the back for containing the outbreak, never mind the bodies behind the Red Cross door. So when you see that Red Cross painted on your neighbour's door, you understand immediately that's not a warning. That's a death sentence. Those people are already dead. They just haven't finished dying yet. And you hurry past, cross yourself, pray it doesn't happen to your house next. Because in plague winter, the Red Cross isn't punishment for wrongdoing. It's just bad luck distributed randomly, condemning families to die together in frozen isolation. It's medieval quarantine, the only public health measure worse than no public health measure at all. The boards go up, the cross is painted, the world moves on. And inside, a family begins the slow countdown to death, locked in and forgotten, casualties of a plague and a system that treats them as acceptable losses. 40 days, that's the theory. Most don't last 20. The greater good demands sacrifice. You're it. Congratulations. Now die quietly so the neighbours can sleep. Winter doesn't eliminate smells. It just freezes them until the next thaw. Your village reeks of unwashed bodies, rotting food, smoke, animal waste, and the sweet, sickly stench of plague victims. You can't escape it. You can't mask it, you just learn to breathe through your mouth. Let's start with the baseline smell of medieval winter, before we even add plague to the equation. Imagine you haven't bathed in 4 months. Nobody has. Bathing in winter is essentially suicide. You'd have to heat massive amounts of water, strip naked in a freezing house, get wet, and then try to dry off before hypothermia sets in. It's not worth the risk, so everyone just accumulates layers of dirt, sweat, dead skin and oils. Your clothes are repositories of months of body secretions. Your hair is greasy enough to waterproof a boat. You smell like a human being who's been marinating in their own essence since October, and so does everyone else. Add to this the fact that you're living with livestock. Your cow, your goats, your chickens, they're all indoors with you, contributing their own aromatic notes to the symphony. Animal urine, manure, wet fur, the specific funk of creatures that also haven't bathed in months and have no concept of personal hygiene. These smells concentrate in your small, poorly ventilated house. They soak into the walls, the straw floor, the thatch roof. Your home doesn't just contain animals. It smells like it is an animal, a large dying one. Smoke is everywhere. Every house has a fire burning constantly, and very few have proper chimneys. The smoke just kind of hangs around inside at nose level, making everything smell like a campfire that never ends. Your clothes smell like smoke. Your hair smells like smoke. Your food tastes like smoke. You've become a human smoked ham, preserved and flavoured by the constant wood smoke that fills your lungs and saturates every surface. On particularly cold days, when everyone's burning more wood, the entire village disappears into a haze of smoke that smells like burning pine, oak, and desperation. Food smells are complicated. Fresh food would smell good, but you don't have fresh food. You have food that's been stored for months slowly rotting in your cellar, turnips that have gone soft, grain that's developed a musty, mouldy undertone, that salted meat hanging from the rafters that's more salt than meat at this point, giving off a sharp, aggressive odour that makes your eyes water. When you cook, these ingredients don't improve. They just become hot versions of their already questionable selves. Your dinner smells like defeat, seasoned with sadness. Human waste adds its own special notes. Chamber pots sit in corners, full of urine and feces. Because emptying them outside means venturing into the freezing cold. These pots are emptied maybe once a day if you're diligent, less if you're tired or sick. The smell is biological. It's the smell of human digestive systems doing their work, concentrated and fermented in wooden containers. Medieval noses were probably desensitized to this smell, but it was still there, a constant background note of, you're a mammal and mammals produce waste. Now let's add plague to this already rich tapestry of odours. Plague has a very specific smell, and it's instantly recognisable once you've encountered it. It's sweet, but not in a good way. Sickly sweet. Like fruit that's gone past ripe into rot. It's the smell of infected tissue, of buboes filled with pus, of bodies struggling and failing to fight off bacterial invasion. Plague victims exhale this smell. It seeps from their skin. It emanates from the swollen lymph nodes that characterise the disease. Once you smell plague, you never forget it. And in plague winter, you smell it everywhere. Death has its own smell, distinct from plague. When bodies start decomposing, even in cold weather, they produce gases, putrescine and cadaverine, the compounds responsible for the smell of rotting flesh. In winter, decomposition is slower, but it still happens. Those frozen bodies stacked outside the church, they're slowly releasing gases. The corpses in people's homes, same thing. Every dead body is a tiny factory producing the smell of decay. Add up dozens or hundreds of bodies, and you've got a village-wide miasma of death. The frozen bodies outside actually smell worse when there's a brief temperature spike. Medieval winter wasn't consistently freezing. There were warmer days mixed in, days when the temperature rose just enough for partial thaw. Those bodies that were perfectly preserved in ice suddenly start warming up. Decomposition accelerates. Gases escape. The smell intensifies dramatically. Then it freezes again, locking the smell into the ice, waiting for the next thaw. It's a cycle of olfactory horror, thaw and smell, freeze and wait, repeat until spring unleashes everything at once. Vomit becomes a common smell. People are sick constantly, from plague, from bad food, from stress, from drinking contaminated water. Vomiting in medieval houses means the smell of stomach acid and partially digested food joins the mix. These puddles freeze on dirt floors, preserving the smell until someone can scrape them up, or they're absorbed into the earth. Every house has zones where someone vomited weeks ago, and nobody's dealt with it adequately. Blood has a metallic smell, and there's a lot of blood in plague winter. Coughing up blood from plague, bleeding from crude medical treatments, nosebleeds from malnutrition, blood from injuries, blood frozen in the streets from fights or accidents. The metallic tang becomes another background note in the village's olfactory landscape. It smells like pennies and iron and desperation. Fear itself has a smell. When humans are terrified, they produce stress hormones that change their body chemistry. The sweat from fear smells different from the sweat from exertion. It's sharper, more acrid. Everyone in plague winter is afraid all the time. And that collective fear creates a smell, subtle but pervasive, the scent of a community on the edge of collapse. Your sense of smell adapts, sort of. The phenomenon is called olfactory fatigue. When you're exposed to a smell constantly, your brain starts filtering it out. You stop noticing the baseline stink of your medieval existence. This is a mercy, mostly, but it also means you have no idea how bad you smell to outsiders. When a traveller passes through your village, they're hit with smells you've long stopped noticing. They gag, they cover their mouths, they hurry through as fast as possible. You think, what's their problem? Not realising that you smell like you died 3 days ago and are being puppeteered by ambitious bacteria. But olfactory fatigue has limits. New smells still register. When your neighbour's house develops the plague smell, you notice immediately. When someone dies in the street, that fresh death smell cuts through your desensitisation. Your nose has created a hierarchy of acceptable baseline smells and new, alarming smells. You've learned to function in a world that smells terrible by categorising smells into normal terrible and concerning terrible. Medieval people tried to combat smells with what they had available. Burning herbs and incense was popular, but it just added smoke and herbal notes to the existing smell cocktail. It didn't eliminate anything. It just made everything smell like death and rosemary, or decay and sage. Some people carried pouches of dried flowers or herbs, holding them to their noses when smells got overwhelming. This created small bubbles of slightly better smell in a world of terrible smell. It was like putting a single air freshener in a garbage dump. Noble effort, minimal impact. The rich had access to perfumes and scented oils, but even these couldn't overcome plague winter's olfactory assault. You could douse yourself in expensive rose oil, but you'd just smell like a rose that died in a sewer. Perfume couldn't mask the fundamental reality that everything and everyone was rotting slowly or quickly in a world without proper sanitation or hygiene infrastructure. Certain locations in the village developed reputations for extreme smell. The tanner's yard, where animal hides were processed in vats of urine and feces, was always the worst-smelling place in town. During plague winter, it somehow got worse, probably because the tanner died and nobody maintained the vats, so they just sat there fermenting. The area around the church where bodies piled up became a smell-dead zone. You'd avoid walking downwind of the church because the smell could knock you over. Inside homes, different areas smelled differently terrible. The corner with the chamber pot, urine and feces, the area near the fire, smoke and burning fat, the sleeping area, body odour and wool, the food storage area, mould and rot, the corner where someone died, death. Your house was a map of smells, each zone distinctly unpleasant in its own way. You navigated by smell as much as by sight, knowing which areas to breathe shallowly in. Children's reactions to smell were telling. Young children who'd only ever known plague winter didn't react to smells that would horrify modern people. To them this was normal. The smell of unwashed humans, animal waste and death was just what the world smelled like. They didn't know anything different. Older children and adults who remembered better times would sometimes stop and say, "Remember when things didn't smell like this?" But mostly everyone just accepted it. This was life now. Life smelled bad. Moving on. The psychological impact of constant bad smells is underestimated. smell is deeply connected to emotion and memory in the brain. Living in a world that constantly smells of death, decay, and suffering does something to your psyche. It's a sensory assault that never ends, a reminder with every breath that things are terrible and getting worse. You can close your eyes to avoid seeing horrors. You can't stop breathing. Some smells triggered immediate associations and reactions. The sweet plague smell meant danger. Stay away from that person or house. The smell of fresh death meant another neighbour gone. The smell of cooking, rare as it was, meant someone still had food and fuel, triggering both hope and jealousy. The smell of smoke increasing meant someone's fire was dying and they were burning everything they could find. Smells became a language, communicating information about survival and death throughout the village. Nighttime amplified smells somehow. Maybe it was because other senses were reduced in darkness, so smell became more prominent. Maybe it was psychological, fear making everything worse, but the smells of plague winter were always worse at night. You'd lie in your straw bed, unable to sleep, breathing shallow through your mouth, trying not to smell your own house, your own family, your own slow decay. The dream of fresh air became an obsession. You fantasized about spring, about open windows, about wind blowing through and clearing out the accumulated stench of winter. You imagined breathing deeply without regretting it immediately. You dreamed of smelling flowers, fresh bread, clean water, anything that didn't reek of death and despair. These dreams were more vivid than dreams of food or warmth. The olfactory deprivation was its own form of torture. Spring, when it finally came, would bring its own smell nightmare. All those frozen bodies would thaw simultaneously. All that accumulated waste would unfreeze. The smell would be apocalyptic, overwhelming, impossible to escape. Villages that survived plague winter would nearly be abandoned due to the smell of spring thaw. People would flee to the countryside until the smell dissipated. Some villages never recovered, abandoned permanently because nobody could stand to live there after smelling what winter had left behind. But you're not at spring yet. You're still in the depths of winter, breathing through your mouth, trying not to smell the symphony of decay that surrounds you. Every breath is a reminder that you're living in hell's waiting room, where even the air is trying to kill you, or at least make you wish you were dead so you wouldn't have to smell anymore. You've learned to categorize smells, to tolerate them, to function despite them, but you've also lost something fundamental, the simple pleasure of breathing deeply without consequence. Fresh air is a concept from another lifetime. Now there's just varying degrees of terrible air, and you're grateful when you find pockets of merely bad air instead of absolutely horrifying air. So you shuffle through your village, breathing shallowly through your mouth, trying not to think about what you're smelling or what you smell like to others. You've become a creature that exists despite its olfactory environment, a human adapted to conditions humans were never meant to endure. The smell of plague winter isn't just unpleasant, it's traumatic. It's the sensory manifestation of a society collapsing, of civilization's hygiene infrastructure failing, of death winning. You smell defeat with every breath, and there's no escape except death itself, which just adds to the smell for everyone else. Welcome to plague winter, where even breathing is an assault on your senses. Try not to inhale too deeply. Actually, try not to inhale at all. You're still alive. Why? Is it luck, divine favour, or just random chance? Survivor's guilt mixes with the exhausting work of staying alive. Every morning you wake up, you're surprised. Every night you go to sleep, you're not sure you'll see dawn. Let's talk about what it means to be a survivor in plague winter, because it's not the victory it sounds like. You wake up on a frozen February morning in 1349, and your first thought isn't gratitude, it's confusion. Why are you still breathing when your wife isn't? Why are your lungs still working when your children's aren't? You didn't do anything special. You weren't more righteous, more careful, more deserving. You just didn't die. Yet, the guilt is immediate and crushing. You look at the empty spaces in your house where people used to be. Your daughter's corner, your father's chair, your brother's spot by the fire. They're gone, and you're here, and there's no logical reason for it. Medieval people believed in divine providence, that God had a plan for everyone. But what plan involves killing the innocent and sparing the guilty? What cosmic purpose is served by dead children and living cowards? You search for meaning and find only randomness, which is somehow more terrifying than purposeful punishment. Every morning starts with the same ritual, checking if you're still healthy. You examine your body for buboes, those telltale swellings that mean death is coming. You check your neck, your armpits, your groin. Nothing yet. You check your temperature by pressing your hand to your forehead. Normal, or at least not obviously fevered. You take inventory of your symptoms. No cough, no headache, no chills. You've survived another night. The relief lasts about 30 seconds before being replaced by dread about surviving the next one. The work of staying alive is exhausting in ways that go beyond physical labour. Every decision is a calculation of risk and resources. Do you go to the well for water and risk exposure to other plague carriers? Do you venture into the forest for firewood and risk exhausting yourself to the point where disease can take hold? Do you eat your meagre rations now or save them for tomorrow? Every choice could be the one that kills you. Every action is potentially your last. The mental energy required to navigate this endless series of deadly decisions is staggering. You're doing the work of multiple people now. Your family used to be 6 people. Now it's you and maybe one other survivor, but the work didn't decrease proportionally. You still need the same amount of firewood to heat the house. You still need the same amount of water. The chores don't care that there are fewer people to do them, so you work harder doing 3 or 4 people's jobs, because the alternative is freezing or starving. You're exhausted before the day begins, and it only gets worse. The loneliness is profound. Even when you're surrounded by other survivors, you're alone. Nobody wants to talk about what they've lost because everyone's lost too much. Conversations are superficial, practical. How's your firewood supply? Seen anyone at the well today? Nobody asks. How are you doing? Because the answer is obviously terrible, and hearing it spoken aloud makes it worse. You're isolated in your grief, surrounded by others who are equally isolated in theirs. Grief has nowhere to go. In normal times, death triggered communal mourning. There were rituals, gatherings, shared remembrance. People would bring food, offer comfort, tell stories about the deceased. Now, everyone's too busy trying not to die themselves. Your wife died 3 weeks ago, and nobody even acknowledged it because 5 other people died that day too. Your personal tragedy is just a statistic in a plague winter ledger. You grieve alone, silently, while also trying to survive, and the combination is soul-crushing. The guilt intensifies with every small comfort you allow yourself. You eat a piece of bread that would have been your daughter's share. The bread tastes like betrayal. You wrap yourself in your dead brother's cloak because you're cold. The warmth feels stolen. You sleep in the spot your father used to occupy because it's marginally warmer. Every comfort purchased with someone else's death feels like a sin. You're surviving on the resources of the dead, and it makes you feel like a scavenger, a ghoul profiting from tragedy. You start making bargains with God, the universe, anyone who might be listening. Let me live and I'll be better. Let me survive and I'll help others. Spare me and I'll dedicate my life to good works. These bargains are desperate attempts to impose meaning on randomness, to convince yourself that your survival is earned rather than arbitrary. They never feel adequate. What could you possibly promise that's worth more than the lives already lost? Watching others die while you survive creates a strange cognitive dissonance. You sit with your neighbour as he succumbs to plague, holding his hand, offering what comfort you can. He dies. You don't get sick. Why? You touched him. You breathed the same air. You were exposed to the same contagion. By all logic, you should be next. But days pass, then weeks, and you remain healthy. You start to wonder if you're somehow immune, or if you're just unlucky enough to survive while everyone you love dies. Some survivors develop a fatalistic mindset. If death is coming anyway, why fight it? Why work so hard to gather firewood, to find food, to stay warm? These people slow down, stop trying, wait for the end. They sit by dying fires, eat sporadically, engage minimally with survival. They're not actively suicidal. The church forbids that. But they're not actively living either. They've entered a liminal space between life and death, waiting to see which claims them first. Others go the opposite direction, becoming almost maniacally focused on survival. They work constantly, obsessively gathering resources, fortifying their homes, doing everything possible to stay alive one more day. These people don't sleep much. They're always in motion, always preparing, always fighting. Their determination is impressive and exhausting to witness. You suspect they're running from grief, that if they stop moving, the weight of loss will crush them. So they don't stop. You fall somewhere in the middle. Some days you're determined to survive, to honour the dead by living, to make it to spring and rebuild. Other days you can't see the point. Why struggle when the outcome seems inevitable? Why suffer longer when you could just give up and join your family? You oscillate between these extremes, your motivation waxing and waning like the moon, governed by forces you don't understand or control. The physical toll of survival is becoming visible. You're thinner than you've ever been, your clothes hanging loose on your frame, your face is gaunt, your eyes sunken. You look in a piece of polished metal that serves as a mirror and barely recognise yourself. You look like the walking dead, which is fitting because you feel like the walking dead. You're a ghost haunting your own life, going through motions because you've forgotten how to do anything else. Relationships among survivors are complicated. On one hand, you're bonded by shared trauma. Only other survivors understand what you've been through. There's an unspoken kinship, a recognition in each other's eyes. On the other hand, there's suspicion and competition. That survivor might be carrying plague. That survivor might steal your resources. Trust is hard when everyone's desperate and death is everywhere. You form alliances of convenience, temporary partnerships that last until someone dies or proves untrustworthy. Some survivors help each other genuinely, creating makeshift families from the remnants of destroyed households. A widow, an orphaned child, a man who lost his entire family. They come together out of necessity and maybe something deeper, a human need for connection that survives even plague winter. These makeshift families are fragile, always one death away from dissolving. But they provide something essential, a reason to keep going. You're not just surviving for yourself anymore, you're surviving for them. Children who survive without parents are especially tragic. You see these orphans wandering the village looking for food, for warmth, for anyone who will care for them. Some survivors take them in, though they can barely feed themselves. Others turn them away, unable to shoulder additional responsibility. The orphans band together, forming child gangs that scavenge and steal to survive. They grow up fast, learning harsh lessons about the world's cruelty. They're the lucky ones, the survivors, but their luck looks a lot like curse. Elderly survivors face different challenges. They've outlived their children, their grandchildren, sometimes their entire lineage. They have no one to care for them in their declining years. They sit in cold houses, too weak to gather firewood, too tired to fetch water, waiting for death with something resembling relief. Some younger survivors help them out of duty or kindness. Others ignore them, focused on their own survival. The old ones fade slowly, less from plague than from loneliness and cold, and the exhaustion of having lived too long. You develop coping mechanisms that would seem insane in normal times. You talk to the dead, having conversations with people who aren't there. "What should I do today?" you ask your departed wife, and you imagine her response. You maintain routines that served purposes that no longer exist. You set places at meals for family members who died months ago. These behaviours are technically signs of mental breakdown, but they're also survival strategies. They preserve some connection to a world that made sense, providing comfort in a reality that's pure chaos. Anger is a constant companion. You're angry at the plague, at God, at the neighbours who survived when your family didn't, at yourself for being unable to save anyone. This anger has nowhere productive to go. You can't fight a disease. You can't punch God. You can't change the past. So the anger turns inward, becoming depression, or outward, becoming random acts of hostility. You snap at people for no reason. You pick fights over nothing. The anger is gasoline with no outlet, burning you from the inside. Hope exists in strange forms. You hope spring will come early. You hope the plague will suddenly stop. You hope to find food, water, warmth, connection, meaning. These hopes are small and often disappointed, but they keep you moving forward. Without hope, even desperate, irrational hope, survival becomes impossible. So you cultivate hope like a precious garden, protecting it from the frost of reality, knowing it's fragile but necessary. Some survivors find purpose in helping others. They become the ones who check on isolated households, who deliver what little food can be shared, who sit with the dying so they don't die alone. This purpose gives their survival meaning. They're alive to help, to serve, to ease suffering, even in tiny ways. These people are saints, or fools, or both, risking their lives daily for others while barely maintaining their own survival. But they seem more at peace than most survivors, having found a reason that transcends mere existence. You wonder constantly about the future. If you survive to spring, then what? The world has fundamentally changed. Your family is gone. Your community is decimated. The economic systems that sustained village life have collapsed. What does rebuilding even look like? Can you start over? Should you? Or is survival just delaying the inevitable, postponing a death that's coming anyway? These questions have no answers, but they occupy your mind during the long, dark nights when sleep won't come. The thing nobody tells you about survival is that it's not triumphant. It's not heroic. It's just grinding, relentless work with no guarantee of payoff. You don't feel like a survivor. You feel like death's procrastinator, someone who hasn't gotten around to dying yet but probably will soon. Every day you don't die feels less like victory and more like confusion. So you wake up again, check for symptoms, find none, and face another day of exhausting survival work. You're alive, though you're not sure why or for how long. The guilt sits heavy. The grief never lifts. The determination wavers but somehow persists. You're surviving not because you want to, but because stopping isn't really an option. You're a survivor of plague winter, which means you're haunted, damaged, and stubbornly refusing to die. It's not much, but it's something. And in 1349, something is more than most people get. So you keep going, one frozen step at a time, carrying the weight of the dead and the burden of being inexplicably, guiltily, impossibly alive. Tomorrow you'll wake up and be surprised again. Or you won't wake up, and the surprise will be someone else's problem. Either way, tonight you're still here, still breathing, still surviving the unsurvivable. That'll have to be enough. Children don't survive plague winters well. Their small bodies can't fight the cold and disease simultaneously. You watch them disappear, one by one, their laughter replaced by silence. It's a special kind of hell that no parent should endure, yet everyone does. Let's start with the brutal mathematics. In normal medieval times, childhood mortality was already horrific. Roughly 1 in 3 children died before age 5 from disease, accidents, or malnutrition. Parents expected to lose children. It was a grim fact of life, incorporated into family planning and emotional armour. But plague winter takes those already terrible odds and makes them catastrophically worse. Now it's closer to 1 in 2, or worse. You have 4 children in autumn 1348. By spring 1349, you might have 1, or none. Children's bodies are fundamentally less equipped for survival than adults. They have less body mass, which means they lose heat faster. Their immune systems are still developing, making them more susceptible to disease. They need more calories per pound of body weight than adults, but they're eating less because food is scarce, and adults get priority for portions. Everything about plague winter is designed to kill children efficiently, and it succeeds with horrifying regularity. The cold gets them first, often before plague does. You watch your 5-year-old daughter shivering constantly, despite being wrapped in every scrap of cloth you own. Her lips turn blue. Her fingers are always cold. She stops complaining about being cold, which is when you know it's serious. Children who complain are uncomfortable. Children who go silent are shutting down. Her body is losing the battle against hypothermia, degree by degree, night by night. One morning she doesn't wake up. No plague symptoms. She just froze to death in her sleep, lying next to you in the family sleeping pile. You were right there, and you couldn't save her. Malnutrition devastates children faster than adults. An adult can survive on meagre rations for months, becoming thinner and weaker but functional. A child's growing body can't sustain that deprivation. You see it in their faces first, cheeks hollowing, eyes growing larger in shrinking faces. Then their energy drops. They stop playing, stop running, stop being children. They sit listlessly by the fire, too weak to move much. Their bellies swell from kwashiorkor, the protein deficiency that creates the paradox of a swollen stomach on a starving body. They look pregnant with hunger. The guilt of feeding choices is excruciating. You have one small piece of bread. Do you give it to your adult son who's doing heavy labour gathering firewood, or your 7-year-old daughter who's already malnourished? Both are starving. Both need food. You can't split it smaller. It's already barely enough for one person. You make a choice, and someone suffers more. There's no right answer. Whatever you choose, you'll replay the decision in your mind for years, wondering if you killed one child by trying to save another. Plague seems to particularly love children. Maybe it's their developing immune systems. Maybe it's their inability to avoid contact with infected people in crowded houses. Maybe it's just that they're already weakened by cold and hunger, making them easy targets. Whatever the reason, children with plague symptoms rarely survive. You see the buboes swell under their small arms, in their tiny necks. You watch fever burn through their little bodies. They cry for you to make it stop, and you're helpless. Medieval medicine is useless for adults. For children, it's not even attempted. They're too small for bloodletting, too young for most herbal remedies. Treatment consists of holding them while they die. The speed of children's deaths is shocking. An adult might linger with plague for a week or more. A child goes from first symptoms to death in 2 or 3 days, sometimes faster. Tuesday morning, your son is slightly feverish. Wednesday afternoon, he's delirious. Thursday evening, he's dead. The quickness almost feels merciful, less suffering, but it also means you have no time to prepare, no time to say proper goodbyes, no time to process what's happening. Your child is there, and then they're not, and your brain can't catch up with the loss. Children don't understand what's happening to them. Adults at least grasp that they're dying, can make peace, or at least acknowledge reality. Children just know they hurt and they're scared and they want their parents to fix it. Make it better, they beg. Make the hurt stop. You can't. You hold them and lie. It'll be okay. You're going to be fine. They believe you because children believe their parents can fix anything. Then they die, still believing your lies, and you're left knowing their last thoughts were probably confusion about why you didn't help them. Orphaned children are everywhere. Plague kills parents, leaving children alone in the world with no one to care for them. Some are taken in by relatives or neighbours, though everyone's stretched thin. Others are simply left to fend for themselves. You see children as young as 4 or 5 wandering the village, begging for food, for shelter, for someone to care. They're too young to survive alone, but nobody has resources to help. Most of these orphans don't make it to spring. They freeze or starve or catch plague, and they die alone because every adult was too busy surviving to notice another lost child. The psychological trauma on surviving children is permanent. They've watched siblings die, they've experienced starvation, they've lived through horrors that would break adults. Those who survive will carry this trauma forever. They'll grow into adults who can't trust that loved ones won't suddenly disappear, who hoard food compulsively, who never feel truly safe or warm. Plague Winter is creating a generation of deeply damaged survivors, assuming any of them survive at all. Children's questions are impossible to answer honestly. Why did Emma die? Because plague is killing everyone and we don't know how to stop it. Will I die too? Probably, yes. Where's Emma now? Frozen in the church with the other bodies because we can't bury anyone. Will you die and leave me alone? I might, and there's nothing I can do to prevent it. You can't say these things to a child, so you lie. Emma's in heaven. You'll be fine. I'm not going anywhere. The lies feel necessary, but each one sits heavy in your chest. Play has disappeared from children's lives. In normal times, even poor medieval children played. They had games, songs, imagination. They ran around, laughed, created joy from nothing. Now children sit silently, conserving energy they don't have. The absence of children's laughter in the village is one of the most haunting aspects of Plague Winter. Villages are supposed to have children playing, running, shouting. Now there's just silence punctuated by occasional crying. The soundscape itself tells you civilization is dying. The few children who remain healthy become incredibly precious. You see parents guarding these children obsessively, keeping them away from others, limiting their exposure, doing everything possible to protect them. These parents are terrified every moment, checking constantly for symptoms, interpreting every cough or sneeze as a death sentence. Their children sense this fear and become anxious themselves, creating a feedback loop of terror that damages them even if they stay physically healthy. Some parents make terrible choices out of desperate love. They steal food to feed their children. They break quarantine to find medicine. They commit acts they'd normally consider immoral because their children are dying, and morality becomes flexible when you're trying to save your child's life. These parents are simultaneously heroes and criminals, motivated by love but causing harm to the community. Judge them if you want. They're beyond caring about judgment. The phenomenon of replacement children emerges after deaths. A child dies, and parents almost immediately start referring to the next youngest by the dead child's name, or expecting that child to fill the dead one's role. "You're the oldest now," they tell their second son after the first dies. "You need to be strong like your sister was," they tell their daughter after her older sister's death. These surviving children are burdened with impossible expectations, forced to become someone else instead of being allowed to be themselves. It's psychological damage layered on top of grief. Infant mortality is nearly total. Babies born in plague winter have almost no chance. They need constant warmth, adequate nutrition, and disease-free environments. They get none of these. Mothers can't produce enough milk because they're starving. Infants can't regulate their body temperature in freezing houses. They catch plague from their sick families. Most babies born between November and March simply die, usually within weeks. Childbirth itself is traumatic when you know the baby probably won't survive. The few infants who do survive are small, sickly, failing to thrive. They don't hit normal developmental milestones. They don't smile or babble or interact. They're listless, conserving whatever energy their tiny bodies can muster. These babies look like tiny old people, their faces pinched and serious, their eyes already sad. They've never known anything but suffering, and it shows in their expressions. Even if they survive to adulthood, they'll carry the physical marks of plague winter: stunted growth, weakened bones, compromised health. Teenagers face unique horrors, old enough to understand fully what's happening but young enough to be vulnerable. They do adult work with children's bodies. They care for dying relatives. They make impossible decisions. Teenage girls become mothers to surviving siblings. Teenage boys become household heads when their fathers die. Their childhoods end abruptly, violently, with no time to transition. They become adults overnight, but they're still children inside, terrified and grieving and overwhelmed. School and education have completely stopped. The few children who were learning to read or learning trades have abandoned those pursuits. Survival takes all available time and energy. An entire generation is growing up illiterate, unskilled, traumatized. The knowledge transmission that normally happens from parent to child has been interrupted. Skills die with the adults who held them. Children who survive won't know how to do the things their parents knew, creating a generational loss of knowledge that will take decades to recover, if it ever does. The village's future dies with its children. A community can recover from losing adults if children survive to rebuild. But when children die en masse, there's no next generation. No one to inherit farms, trades, knowledge. No one to continue family lines. No one to care for the elderly survivors. Villages losing most of their children are essentially dead. They just haven't finished dying yet. They're ghost towns in waiting. You watch your neighbour bury her fourth child in as many months. She's hollow-eyed, moving mechanically through the rituals because what else can she do? She's lost everything that made her future meaningful. She'll probably survive to spring, but for what? To live in a house full of empty spaces where children should be? To grow old with no one to remember her children existed? Survival without children to survive for is just existing, and barely at that. The prayers for children take on desperate tones. Please God, spare the children. Take me instead. Let them live. They're innocent. They don't deserve this. These prayers aren't answered. God appears to have no special mercy for children. They die at the same rate as adults, maybe faster. The theological implications are devastating for people who believe in a loving God who cares for the innocent. If children can suffer and die like this, what does that say about divine justice? These questions have no good answers. You're down to one child now. Your son, 8 years old, increasingly thin and quiet. He used to have 3 siblings. Now it's just him. He's stopped asking where they are. He knows. He sees the pattern. He's probably wondering when it's his turn. You're wondering too. You watch him obsessively for symptoms, for signs of fever, for anything wrong. You're trying to protect him from an enemy you can't see, fight, or escape. You're failing, and you both know it. Every morning he wakes up alive feels like borrowed time. Every night he survives is a small miracle that you know won't last. You're watching your child slowly die of hunger and cold, and there's nothing you can do except make his suffering slightly less terrible. That's what parenthood has become in Plague Winter. Managing degrees of suffering, not preventing it. The children of Plague Winter are dying in ways that will haunt survivors forever. Those who make it to spring will be scarred, literally and figuratively, by what they've endured. They'll be the hollow-eyed adults of the next generation, unable to forget the winter when childhood ended and hell began. So you hold your remaining child a little tighter tonight, knowing tomorrow isn't guaranteed. You whisper promises you can't keep. You try to create warmth and safety in a world that offers neither. You fail, as everyone fails, but you try anyway because that's what parents do, even when trying isn't enough, especially then. Your animals are suffering too. Chickens freeze to death overnight. Pigs succumb to disease. Cows stop producing milk. The creatures that were supposed to sustain you through winter are dropping like flies, leaving you with even fewer options for survival. Let's talk about your chickens, those resilient little dinosaurs that normally survive almost anything. Chickens are tough. They can handle cold weather reasonably well if they have shelter and food, but Plague Winter provides neither adequately. Your chickens are living inside your house because outside they'd freeze instantly. They roost on your rafters, in corners, anywhere they can find a perch. They're cold, stressed, and terrified. Stressed chickens don't lay eggs, so your chickens, which you're keeping alive specifically for eggs, aren't producing anything except droppings and noise. One morning you wake up to find a chicken dead on the floor. Just dead. No obvious injury, no signs of disease. It froze. Inside your house, the chicken froze to death. This tells you two things. First, your house is basically an outdoor enclosure with a roof. Second, if a chicken can freeze in here, you probably can too. You look at the dead chicken and face a decision. Eat it immediately before it spoils or save it somehow. You choose to eat it immediately because you have no way to preserve meat, and at least dead chicken is protein. Your family has an unexpected feast that night. Though calling it a feast is generous. It's more like slightly warmed frozen chicken that tastes like desperation. The other chickens watch you eat their companion. Do chickens understand death? You're not sure, but they seem nervous afterward. They huddle together more tightly, making distressed sounds. Over the next week, 2 more die. Your chicken flock is shrinking faster than you can eat them, which is saying something because you're trying to eat them to survive. By midwinter, you're down to one scraggly hen that somehow refuses to die, despite being the smallest and weakest of the original group. You name her Survivor, and she becomes a weird symbol of hope. If this pathetic chicken can make it through winter, maybe you can too. Your pig is a different story. Pigs are valuable. They eat anything, provide significant meat, and can be salted or smoked for preservation. Your pig was meant to be winter insurance, a mobile larder you could slaughter when food got scarce. But the pig has its own ideas about winter survival, and those ideas don't include staying healthy. First, the pig stops eating properly. This is alarming because pigs eat everything always. A pig that won't eat is a sick pig. You try feeding it scraps, old vegetables, anything. The pig sniffs and walks away. This is the medieval equivalent of your smoke detector beeping, a clear warning that something's very wrong. The pig develops some kind of respiratory illness. You can hear it wheezing from across the room. It coughs, which you didn't know pigs could do, but apparently when they're sick enough they do. Is it plague? Can pigs get plague? You have no idea. Medieval veterinary medicine is even worse than human medicine, which is already terrible. Your treatment options are do nothing and hope it recovers, or slaughter it now before it dies and the meat spoils. You choose slaughter because a sick pig is still edible pig, whereas a dead from disease pig might kill everyone who eats it. You've never butchered a pig before. The village butcher died 2 months ago. You're working from vague memories of watching him work and a lot of hopeful improvisation. The slaughter is messy, traumatic, and inefficient. You waste probably 1/3 of the meat through incompetence. The pig's death is not quick or clean. It's brutal, and it bothers you more than you'd like to admit. You've killed animals before, But this feels different. This feels like murdering your survival chances. The meat from a sick pig needs to be cooked thoroughly, which requires fire, which requires firewood you don't have much of. You cook what you can immediately, eating until you're uncomfortably full, because who knows when you'll have meat again. The rest you try to preserve with your limited salt supply. It's not enough salt. The meat will probably spoil before you eat it all, but you try anyway. Within days you can smell the pork starting to turn. You eat it faster, increasingly questionable meat consumed out of necessity. Some of it makes you sick. You eat it anyway. Wasting food is worse than food poisoning. Your cow is perhaps the saddest casualty. Cows are expensive, valuable, almost like family members. Your cow, Bessie, yes, you named her. Everyone names their cow, has been providing milk for your family for 3 years. She's gentle, patient, and currently dying slowly of malnutrition and cold. Cows need significant fodder to produce milk and maintain body condition. Hay, grain, vegetables. You don't have enough for your family, let alone a 100-200 pound ruminant. Bessie is eating whatever you can scrounge. Straw from the roof thatch, tree bark, frozen grass scraped from under snow. It's not enough. Her milk production drops first. A healthy cow might give 3 or 4 gallons daily. Bessie's down to less than a pint, and it's watery, barely white. You milk her every morning out of habit and hope. But the returns diminish until one day there's nothing. Her udder is dry. She's put all her energy into basic survival, and there's nothing left for milk production. Now she's just a large animal consuming resources without providing anything in return. Bessie grows thinner. You can count her ribs. Her hip bones jut out sharply. She moves slowly, stiffly, like every step hurts. She stops standing up unless forced. When cows stop standing voluntarily, they're usually dying. You face another impossible decision. Slaughter her for meat while there's still meat on her bones, or hope she recovers in spring. Recovering seems unlikely. She's too far gone. But slaughtering your cow is like killing a family member. This animal has fed your children, been part of your daily routine, trusted you to care for her. And you're going to murder her because you're starving. You can't do it. You don't have the emotional strength to butcher Bessie. So she continues declining, getting weaker daily, until one morning you find her dead in her corner of the house. She's been dead for hours, already stiffening. Now you have a dead cow inside your home, and moving a yawn 200-pound corpse is essentially impossible for one malnourished person. You try dragging her. She doesn't budge. You try rigging a pulley system with ropes. The ropes break. Eventually you give up on moving her and just start butchering where she lies, carving meat off the carcass in your living space, because what other option exists? The butchering takes days. You're not strong enough to do it quickly, and the cow is frozen solid in places. You saw through frozen beef with dull knives, occasionally warming sections by the fire to make them easier to cut. Your house becomes an abattoir. Blood everywhere, meat piling up, bones and organs you don't know what to do with. The smell is indescribable, a combination of raw meat, blood, frozen death, and your regular house stench. You're living in a slaughterhouse, sleeping next to cow parts, trying not to think about how this is your life now. The meat from a cow that died of illness is risky. You cook everything thoroughly, which means you're burning through firewood at an unsustainable rate. But the alternative is eating questionable raw beef, which would definitely kill you. Some of the meat is clearly spoiled even after cooking. You eat it anyway. Your standards for food safety have dropped below sea level. If it's not actively moving with maggots, it's edible. That's the bar. Goats, if you have them, fare slightly better than other livestock. Goats are stubborn, resourceful, and will eat literally anything. You've watched your goat eat wooden planks, leather straps, and parts of your cloak. This dietary flexibility helps them survive when other animals starve. But goats need water, which is increasingly hard to provide. They need some minimal shelter from wind, and they're social animals that get depressed and sick when alone. Your goat watches its companions die and develops what can only be described as depression. It stops eating, stops moving, just stands in the corner looking miserable. Can goats die of sadness? Apparently yes, because that's what happens. Sheep, if they haven't already been slaughtered for meat, are struggling with the cold despite their wool. You'd think sheep would be fine. They have built-in insulation. But they need proper nutrition to maintain that wool and generate body heat. Starving sheep get cold just like everything else. Plus, they're prone to respiratory infections in damp, poorly ventilated conditions, which describes every medieval house in winter. Your sheep develop pneumonia, coughing and wheezing, producing horrifying sounds that keep you awake at night. They die slowly, struggling to breathe until they can't anymore. The dogs, traditionally working animals and companions, are faring worst of all. Dogs need meat in their diet. You have no meat to spare. You're barely feeding yourself. Your dog eats scraps, bones, whatever falls on the floor. It's not enough. The dog grows thin, its ribs showing, its energy gone. It stops barking, stops wagging. Just lies by the fire conserving energy. You know you should probably butcher the dog for meat. Dog meat is food, after all, and people are starving, but you can't bring yourself to do it. The dog has been loyal, helpful, a friend. Eating it feels like a line you can't cross. So the dog slowly starves while you slowly starve, both of you too stubborn to die quickly. Cats have gone feral. House cats, unable to find enough mice and rats in picked-over houses, have left for the outdoors where at least there's a chance of hunting. Some survive by becoming wildly efficient hunters. Others freeze or starve. You occasionally see cat corpses frozen in the snow, small and sad, their hunting instincts insufficient against winter and plague. The cats that survive develop a hard, feral edge. They avoid humans, trust no one, and occasionally raid houses for any food they can find. They've become part of the village's scavenger ecosystem, competing with rats for dwindling resources. Rats, ironically, are doing better than most livestock. Rats are adaptable, resourceful, and reproduce quickly. While chickens freeze and cows starve, rats find ways to survive. They nest in warm spots, steal human food, eat corpses when available. The rat population might actually be growing while everything else dies. This is darkly fitting since rats and their fleas are spreading the plague that's killing everyone. The rats are winning plague winter, which somehow makes everything worse. The broader implications of livestock death are catastrophic. These animals weren't just food sources, they were economic assets, labour partners, and cultural fixtures. A cow represented years of investment, a source of ongoing milk production, potential breeding income. Losing a cow meant losing all of that. A pig was a winter insurance. Chickens provided eggs and meat. When these animals die, you're not just losing immediate food, you're losing the potential for future food, for rebuilding after plague winter ends. Each dead animal is a piece of your future dying. The emotional toll is underestimated. Farmers develop relationships with their animals. You spent hours caring for Bessie, talking to her while milking, appreciating her gentle nature. Your pig, annoying as it was, had personality. The chickens were part of daily routine. These weren't just resources, they were companions in a lonely existence. Watching them die adds another layer of grief to an already unbearable situation. By late winter, your house that once held multiple chickens, a pig, a cow, a goat, a dog, and maybe a cat now holds maybe one scraggly chicken and nothing else. The empty spaces where animals should be feel wrong. Houses are supposed to have livestock. The absent screams of loss and failure. You failed to keep your animals alive. You failed as a farmer, as a provider, as a steward. Never mind that the circumstances were impossible. The guilt remains. The village's collective livestock loss is a slow-motion agricultural collapse. Spring planting will require oxen or horses for ploughing. Most are dead. Rebuilding herds will take years and resources nobody has. The livestock that sustained medieval rural life for centuries is being wiped out in a single winter, and recovery won't be simple or quick. So you sit in your empty, quiet house, eating the last of your sick cow, listening to your one remaining chicken shuffle nervously in the corner, and you wonder if anything will be left alive by spring. The animals that were supposed to sustain you have instead become casualties themselves, victims of the same cold, hunger, and plague killing everything else. Your chicken, survivor, makes a small noise. You look at her. She looks back. Neither of you is sure you'll make it. But you're both still here, stubbornly refusing to die yet. It's not much of a victory, but in plague winter, it's all you've got. The rich fled to their country estates at the first sign of plague, locking their gates and pretending the world wasn't ending. Meanwhile, you're freezing in your hovel, doing the work of 3 dead men, and wondering what exactly lords are good for if not this. Let's talk about the feudal contract. that supposedly sacred agreement that's defined European society for centuries. The deal was simple. Peasants work the land, provide labour and a portion of their harvest to the Lord. In exchange, the Lord provides protection, justice, and leadership during crisis. It's a social contract that, in theory, benefits everyone. In practice, during plague winter, you're discovering that this contract is extremely one-sided, and the side that's not yours is the one currently hiding behind stone walls eating preserved delicacies. When the first plague reports reached your region in autumn 1348, the local nobility responded with remarkable speed and efficiency. They packed their valuables, gathered their immediate families, selected a few essential servants, usually the ones least likely to be infected, and simply left. They abandoned their manor houses near the village and retreated to isolated country estates, hunting lodges, or fortified castles far from population centres. Their logic was sound. Plague spreads through contact with infected people, so avoid people entirely. For the rich with multiple properties and the resources to relocate, this strategy actually worked. For everyone else, it was a death sentence. Your lord, Baron Edmund, hasn't been seen since October. His manor house sits empty, shuttered, guarded by a single elderly caretaker who probably drew the short straw in the evacuation lottery. The Baron took his family, his personal priest, his favourite servants, his hunting dogs, and his portable wealth, and vanished to his northern estate 3 days' ride away. He left behind an entire village of people who depended on him for everything the feudal system promised: protection, justice, resource management, leadership. The practical implications are immediate and catastrophic. The Lord's Court, where disputes were settled and justice administered, is closed. Nobody's here to arbitrate when neighbours fight over firewood or when someone's accused of stealing. The social order that kept village life functional has collapsed. People settle disputes with violence now because there's no authority to appeal to. The strong take what they want from the weak, because who's going to stop them? The Lord? He's 3 days away, enjoying venison in a warm castle. The Lord's granaries, storehouses filled with grain collected as taxes and rents, are locked and inaccessible. You know food is in there, enough grain to feed the village for months. But the keys are with the Baron, and his steward fled with him. You could break in. The locks aren't designed to withstand determined peasants with axes, but that's theft from the Lord, technically punishable by death, assuming anyone's around to punish you, which they're not. Some desperate villagers do break in eventually, taking grain to feed their starving families. It feels like theft, even though you paid for that grain with your labour. The guilt and necessity war inside you while you eat stolen bread from a lord who abandoned you. The Lord's hunting forests, strictly off-limits to peasants under normal circumstances, are suddenly unpatrolled. Those deer, boar, and rabbits that you'd be hanged for poaching. Nobody's enforcing those laws anymore, but even this small mercy is complicated. Hunting requires energy, equipment, and knowledge most peasants don't have. You've never hunted deer. You don't own a bow. You're so weak from starvation that you couldn't chase down a rabbit if your life depended on it, which it does. So the hunting forests sit there, full of meat, while you starve because the skills required to access that meat were deliberately kept from you by the same lord who's now absent. The feudal obligations continue despite the lord's absence. Harvest, what little there was, still required giving a portion to the lord. Taxes are still technically due. Work obligations supposedly remain in effect, except there's no one to enforce them, no one to collect, no one to punish non-compliance. This creates a weird liminal space where peasants are technically serfs bound to the land and obligations, but practically free because no authority exists to compel obedience. It's a freedom born of abandonment rather than liberation, and it tastes bitter. Some nobles did stay. To their credit, a handful of lords and ladies remained with their people, accepting the risk of plague. These nobles become almost legendary in their communities. Lord Richard of the neighbouring manor stayed, helped organise response efforts, distributed food from his stores, and eventually died of plague alongside his peasants. His death is mourned genuinely, because he actually fulfilled his feudal obligations when it mattered. He's the exception that proves the rule. Most nobles fled. The class resentment that already existed in medieval society intensifies dramatically. You've always known the system was unfair, nobles living in luxury while you break your back in fields. But there was at least the illusion that they provided something in return. Protection, justice, social order. Plague Winter shatters that illusion. The nobles who fled revealed the truth. The feudal contract only works when it's convenient for them. When times get hard, they save themselves and leave everyone else to die. Communication from the absent nobles is sporadic and useless. Occasionally a messenger arrives from Baron Edmund, carrying letters with instructions or commands. Maintain order. Continue working the fields. Pay your obligations. These messages are laughably disconnected from reality. Maintain order? Half the village is dead. Work the fields? It's winter and everyone's starving. Pay obligations? With what? The disconnect between the Baron's isolated bubble and your horrific reality is so vast it's almost funny. Almost. The messenger also brings no help. No food, no medicine, no resources. Just words. The Baron sends his thoughts and prayers, medieval edition, which accomplish exactly as much as thoughts and prayers ever do. The messenger leaves quickly, terrified of catching plague, and you're alone again with your empty platitudes and full bellies of anger. Some nobles seem to genuinely not understand what's happening. They're so insulated in their country estates, their information filtered through servants and intermediaries, that they don't grasp the scale of catastrophe. They think plague winter is bad, but not complete social collapse. Bad. They're planning for spring planting and normal operations, not realizing there might not be enough survivors to plant anything. Their delusion is almost impressive in its completeness. The economic implications ripple outward. Lords own the mills, the ovens, the basic infrastructure of medieval economy. These are all sitting idle because the people who ran them are dead, and the lords who owned them are absent. You need grain milled into flour? Too bad, the mill's locked. Need bread baked in the communal oven? Too bad, no one's maintaining it. The economic system that functioned through feudal obligation has seized up completely, and there's no mechanism for repair because the people at the top of the hierarchy aren't here. Property disputes become nightmares. When a peasant family dies without heirs, technically their land and possessions revert to the lord. But the lord's not here to claim them, adjudicate disputes, or reassign property. So neighbouring families just take what they want, leading to arguments, fights, sometimes violence. Without authority to enforce property rights, possession becomes the only law. The strongest, most aggressive survivors end up with the most resources, regardless of legal or moral right. The village priest, lowest rung of the ecclesiastical nobility, faces his own crisis. He's supposed to be the moral authority, the representative of divine order, but his superiors, the bishops and abbots who should provide guidance, have also fled or died. The priest is on his own, trying to maintain religious observance and social order with no support from above. Some priests rise to the challenge admirably. Others crack under pressure, becoming drunk, depressed, or abandoning their posts. Father Benedict in your village is holding on by his fingernails, but he's just one exhausted man against the tide of chaos. The children of nobles, even in their safe estates, aren't entirely protected. Plague found its way into some country manors despite isolation efforts. Servants brought it in. Supplies from infected areas carried it. Sometimes isolation failed simply through bad luck. When plague hit these isolated noble households, it spread just as devastatingly. Nobles died in their castles, surrounded by luxury and powerless against disease. Their wealth couldn't save them. Their status meant nothing to bacteria. This should have been humbling, but you doubt the survivors learned anything from it. The psychological distance between peasant suffering and noble comfort is staggering. You're eating frozen turnips and questionable cow meat in a freezing hovel surrounded by corpses. The Baron is, presumably, eating roasted meats and drinking wine in a heated castle with his family alive and intact. He's experiencing inconvenience, isolation, boredom, reduced staff. You're experiencing hell. The fact that you're both technically living through the same plague. Winter is absurd. You're not experiencing the same event. You're experiencing two completely different realities that happen to exist in the same historical moment. Some peasants discuss rebellion. In whispered conversations, people talk about how the lords abandoned them, broke the feudal contract, forfeited their right to rule. These conversations are dangerous even now. Treason is still treason, but they're also cathartic. Maybe when spring comes, things will be different. Maybe the survivors won't accept the old order. Maybe the lords will return to find their authority permanently diminished. These are heady, dangerous thoughts, and they're spreading through the surviving population like a different kind of contagion. The few nobles who remained and survived will gain enormous respect and loyalty. Lord Richard, who died with his people, is already becoming legend. Stories about his sacrifice, his courage, his fulfillment of feudal obligations are being shared and embellished. He'll be remembered for generations. The nobles who fled will also be remembered, but differently. Their names will be accompanied by bitterness, resentment, and the knowledge that when the chips were down they chose self-preservation over duty. The manorial system is effectively suspended in many areas. Without lords present to enforce obligations, direct labour and collect rents, peasants are operating autonomously for the first time in generations. Some find this freedom exhilarating despite the circumstances. They're making their own decisions, working their own land, keeping their own produce. It's plague winter communism by default. Others find it terrifying. They've been conditioned to follow orders, and without authority structures they're lost. The psychological dependence on feudal hierarchy runs deep. The return of the nobles, when it eventually happens, will be awkward at best. They'll come back expecting to resume control, to find their peasants grateful to see them. Instead, they'll find villages decimated, survivors traumatized and angry, and a workforce depleted by half or more. They'll find people who've gotten used to autonomy and won't easily submit to the old order. The post-plague power dynamics will be fundamentally different, though it'll take time for everyone to realize it. But that's future concern. Right now, in February 1349, you're just bitter. Bitter that your supposed protectors fled. Bitter that you're doing all the suffering while they're doing all the surviving. Bitter that the feudal system you were taught to respect has revealed itself as a one-way extraction scheme that only functions when the extractors face no personal cost. You stand outside in the freezing wind, looking toward where the Baron's manor sits empty and dark. You think about the warm castle where he's hiding. You think about the social contract that's supposed to bind you together. You think about how little that contract means when one party can simply leave. The nobles locked themselves away and left you to die. That's what you'll remember. That's what survivors will tell their children. That's the story that will echo through generations. When the world ended, the rich saved themselves and abandoned everyone else. Nothing about that surprises you, but the confirmation still stings. You were always disposable to them. Plague winter just made it obvious. So you turn back to your frozen hovel, to your dying family, to your impossible survival tasks. The Lord isn't coming to help. He was never going to. You're on your own, and you always were. At least now you know for sure. No merchants travel in plague winter. Roads are dangerous. Towns are quarantined and trust has evaporated. You're on your own with whatever supplies you had before the world shut down. There's no Amazon Prime delivering firewood. There's just you, the cold and dwindling hope. Let's talk about what trade used to mean in your medieval village. Before the plague, before winter, merchants were the lifeblood connecting your isolated community to the wider world. They brought salt from the coast, essential for preserving meat. They brought iron tools and nails from distant forges. They brought textiles you couldn't produce locally, spices that made terrible foods slightly less terrible, medicines that didn't work but at least gave the illusion of options. Every few weeks, travelling merchants would arrive with their carts, set up temporary stalls, and suddenly your village had access to things you couldn't make yourself. These merchants weren't charity workers. They were profit seekers, often charging outrageous prices for basic goods. But they filled a crucial economic function. They connected surplus from one region with shortage in another. Your village produced wool? Great. The merchant bought it and sold it 3 towns over. Another village produced pottery? The merchant brought that to you. This network of trade, however exploitative, kept medieval economy functioning. It was the closest thing to a distribution system that existed. Then plague arrived, and the merchants stopped coming. First gradually, then completely. Early in the outbreak, some brave or foolish merchants still travelled, taking precautions, avoiding obviously infected areas. These merchants charged premium prices, the danger tax, but at least goods moved. By winter 1348, even these risk-takers had stopped. The mortality rate among travelling merchants was catastrophic. They moved between towns, exposed to plague at every stop, carrying infection with them like invisible cargo. Most died. The few who survived decided that profit wasn't worth certain death. Trade routes that had functioned for centuries simply ceased operation. Your village's last merchant visit was October, maybe November. A thin, nervous man with a half-empty cart arrived, sold his remaining goods at extortionate prices, and left quickly, refusing to stay overnight. He wouldn't touch anyone's money directly. You had to drop coins into a bowl of vinegar. He wouldn't let anyone approach his cart too closely. He left before sunset, driving his horse hard like demons were chasing him. Which, from his perspective, they were. You never saw him again. You assume he died somewhere on a frozen road, his cart looted by bandits or desperate peasants, his body left to freeze with the other travellers who didn't make it. Without trade, your village's weaknesses become catastrophically apparent. You've always imported salt because your region doesn't have salt deposits. Now you have no salt. Food preservation without salt is nearly impossible. You've always bought iron tools because your village has no forge. The blacksmith died, and even if he hadn't, there's no iron stock to work with. Your tools break, wear out, rust, and there's no way to replace them. You've always purchased certain medicines and herbs from travelling apothecaries. Now those are gone too, though given that medieval medicine doesn't work anyway, this might be the least damaging shortage. The roads themselves have become impassable, not just from snow and ice, that's normal winter difficulty, but from abandonment and danger. Normally communities maintain roads as a collective obligation. Bridges are repaired, major obstacles cleared, basic wayfinding maintained. Now nobody's maintaining anything. Bridges collapse under snow weight and stay collapsed. Fallen trees block roads and remain there. The infrastructure of travel is degrading rapidly, and there's no workforce or organisation to maintain it. Banditry has increased dramatically. Desperate people do desperate things, and robbing travellers is easier than farming when you're starving. Former peasants displaced by plague have turned to highway robbery out of necessity. They're not professional bandits, they're amateurs driven by hunger. This makes them more dangerous because they're unpredictable and have nothing to lose. Travellers who attempt winter journeys frequently disappear, their bodies found in spring thaws if they're found at all. The roads have become killing zones and everyone knows it. Towns and cities have closed their gates. Urban areas, hit harder by plague due to population density, are now fortified islands of paranoia. Guards at gates turn away all travellers, no exceptions. Even if you could reach a town, even if you had money or goods to trade, they wouldn't let you in. You're a potential plague carrier, and they've learned that visitors bring death. Some towns have signs posted outside their gates. No entry on pain of death. They're not bluffing. Travellers shot with crossbow bolts for approaching too close have been found outside several city walls. Urban populations have decided that isolation is survival, and they're enforcing it violently. The merchants who might have survived are hoarding what goods they have. Why sell now when scarcity will only increase? Why travel dangerous roads to reach villages that might be entirely dead by the time you arrive? The rational economic decision is to wait, to hold inventory until the worst passes and markets stabilise. This makes sense for merchants but is catastrophic for villages that need those goods now, not eventually. You're watching market economics fail in real time, watching the invisible hand of the market give you a very visible middle finger. Regional specialisation, normally an economic strength, becomes a fatal weakness during plague winter. Your village's economy was built around wool production. You grew sheep, processed wool, sold it to merchants who distributed it elsewhere. In return, you bought the things you couldn't produce locally. This system worked great when trade functioned. Now your village has lots of wool and no way to convert it into food, tools, or salt. You're asset-rich and resource-poor, which is an academic way of saying you're starving while sitting on a pile of unsellable wool. You can't eat wool, burn wool for long-lasting heat, or craft metal tools from wool. Your primary economic product is worthless without trade networks to move it. Some villages try to restart local trade on a small scale. Desperate peasants from different villages meet at neutral locations, crossroads, abandoned inns, to barter. These exchanges are tense, dangerous affairs. Everyone suspects everyone else of carrying plague. Negotiations happen at distance, goods are left on the ground, and parties retreat before the other approaches. Money, believed to carry disease, is often refused. These primitive barter meets are inefficient and rarely successful, but they're the only trade happening. It's medieval economy reduced to its most basic, primal form. The absence of news is psychologically devastating. Merchants didn't just bring goods, they brought information. What's happening in neighbouring towns? Is the plague getting better or worse? Is anyone organising response efforts? Has the king issued decrees? You have no idea. Your information bubble extends to the edge of your village and no further. For all you know, the entire world outside has ended. Maybe your village is the last pocket of humanity. Maybe civilization has collapsed everywhere and you just don't know it yet. The uncertainty is maddening. Rumours fill the information void and rumours in Plague Winter are wild. You hear third-hand that a city to the south is completely dead, every resident gone, buildings standing empty. You hear another rumour that a northern region found a cure, that people are recovering, that the plague is ending there. You hear whispers of divine miracles, of apocalyptic signs, of foreign invasions taking advantage of plague weakness. None of these rumours can be verified. They spread through the surviving population like a different kind of contagion, mutating with each telling, becoming increasingly disconnected from reality. Some items become currency substitutes in the absence of trade networks. Firewood is the new gold. A cart of firewood can buy almost anything because everyone needs it desperately. Food, especially preserved food, becomes incredibly valuable. Salt, rare before, is now mythically precious. You hear stories of people trading family heirlooms for a handful of salt. Tools, especially iron tools, command extraordinary prices in the informal barter economy. Desperation has revalued everything based purely on survival utility. The long-term economic implications are staggering. Supply chains that took generations to establish are destroyed in months. Merchant houses that operated for decades are bankrupt or dead. Trade relationships between regions are severed. When Plague Winter finally ends, rebuilding these networks will take years, maybe decades. Some routes will never reopen because the people who knew them are dead. Economic knowledge, where to source particular goods, which routes are profitable, which contacts are reliable, is dying with the merchants who held it. Your village's credit and debt relationships have become meaningless. You owed the merchant Thomas 50 pence for tools purchased last summer. Thomas is probably dead, his records lost or destroyed, his heirs unknown. Do you still owe that money? To whom? The entire system of medieval credit, based on personal relationships and verbal agreements, has collapsed. Nobody knows who owes what to whom. Debts are unpayable and uncollectible. It's a financial reset, though not the liberating kind, just chaos. The guild system, which regulated trade and maintained quality standards, has ceased functioning. Guilds required regular meetings, apprentice training, quality enforcement. None of this is happening during Plague Winter. The guildmaster might be dead. The meeting halls are empty or serving as morgues. Apprentices are dying before completing their training. The institutional knowledge about how to produce and trade specific goods is evaporating. When a master craftsman dies without passing his knowledge to apprentices, that expertise is lost, possibly forever. Imports from distant regions are fantasy now. You used to occasionally see goods from hundreds of miles away. Cloth from Flanders, wine from France, tools from German workshops. These long-distance trade routes required multiple intermediaries, functioning markets, and stable political conditions. All of that is gone. The international medieval trade network, fragile at the best of times, has completely broken down. Your economic world has shrunk to what can be produced or found within walking distance of your village. The absence of trade creates weird abundance, scarcity paradoxes. Your village might have surplus of one thing, say wool or pottery, but desperate shortage of everything else. Another village 10 miles away might have the opposite situation. Under normal circumstances, merchants would arbitrage these differences, moving surplus to deficit areas. Now the surplus just sits unused while people starve for want of things that exist in abundance elsewhere. It's economically irrational, but isolation makes rational exchange impossible. Children growing up in plague winter will have no memory of functional trade networks. They'll think this isolated subsistence existence is normal. The concept of merchants travelling between towns, of goods flowing across regions, of markets where diverse products are available, these will become old people's stories, possibly dismissed as exaggerations. An entire generation's economic worldview is being shaped by collapse and isolation. Some survivor communities develop proto-cooperative economics. Without outside trade, villages that still have functioning populations try to become more self-sufficient. They diversify production, sharing labour and resources collectively. These cooperatives are born of necessity, not ideology, but they represent a fundamental shift from the pre-plague economy. If everyone's going to survive, everyone needs to contribute what they can and take what they need. It's crude communism driven by survival instinct. The rich, in their isolated estates, maintain some limited trade among themselves. Nobles send messengers between properties, exchanging goods and information within their class. This elite trade network functions because nobility has resources for security, can afford to pay guards, and can enforce quarantine protocols for arriving goods. So the rich continue their economy, while the peasant economy collapses entirely. The divergence between noble and peasant experiences grows even wider. You stand in your village, surrounded by silent houses and frozen corpses, and think about the merchant Thomas who used to visit. You remember complaining about his prices, haggling over pennies, resenting his profit margins. Now you'd give anything to see his cart rolling up the road, to hear him shout his goods, to have access to the wider world of trade. You took it for granted, that connection, that flow of goods, that sense that your village was part of something larger. Now you're just isolated, a frozen island in a world that's forgotten you exist. You have wool you can't sell, needs you can't fill, and no way to bridge the gap. Trade isn't just economics, it's connection, information, hope. And all of that has stopped. The roads are empty, the merchants are dead or hiding, the towns are closed, and you're alone with your diminishing supplies, wondering what you'll do when you run out of something essential. The answer is nothing. You'll do nothing because there's nothing to be done. Welcome to Plague Winter, where the global economy is dead and your village is its unmarked grave. No refunds, no exchanges, no returns. You're stuck with what you have until you die, or spring comes. Whichever happens first. So here you are, at the end of another day in Plague Winter 1349. You've survived the cold, the hunger, the isolation, and the constant presence of death. You've made it through frozen mornings and endless nights. You've buried family, burned furniture for warmth, and eaten things you'd rather forget. You've done all of this while carrying the weight of grief, guilt, and the exhausting knowledge that tomorrow will probably be just as terrible as today. Looking back at what you've endured, it seems almost impossible that humans survived this at all. The winter of 1348-1349 wasn't just cold, it was apocalyptic. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it destroyed communities, shattered economies, and broke the social fabric that held medieval life together. And yet, somehow, people endured. Not everyone. Not even most people. But enough. Enough to rebuild, to remember, to pass down stories of the winter when the world ended and somehow didn't. Medieval peasants during Plague Winter showed a kind of resilience that's hard to comprehend from our comfortable modern perspective. They faced conditions that would break most of us within days, and they kept going for months. They watched everyone they loved die, and still gathered firewood the next morning. They starved while sitting on frozen ground and still found reasons to hope for spring. They were cold, terrified, and hopeless, and yet they survived through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. These weren't heroes in the traditional sense, they weren't noble or particularly virtuous. They were just ordinary people ground down by circumstances beyond their control, doing whatever it took to see another sunrise. They made terrible choices, hurt each other, stole, lied, and abandoned their principles when survival demanded it. They were human in the messiest, most desperate sense of the word, and that makes their survival even more remarkable. The resilience of Plague Winter survivors built the world that came after. Those who made it to spring, traumatized, physically broken but alive, became the generation that would reshape medieval society. The plague's demographic catastrophe led to labour shortages that gave surviving peasants unprecedented bargaining power. The feudal system began its long decline because peasants who'd survived hell had no interest in going back to the old order. The world changed because the people who survived were changed, hardened by winter and plague into something that wouldn't easily submit. But tonight isn't about historical consequences or long-term impacts. Tonight is about gratitude. Because as you lie in your warm bed, in your heated home, with running water and electric lights and a refrigerator full of food that won't kill you, you're experiencing luxuries that medieval peasants couldn't even imagine. That blanket you're wrapped in, it's cleaner and warmer than anything a medieval king owned. That thermostat you barely think about, it's performing miracles of climate control that would seem like divine intervention to someone from 1349. You're not going to freeze to death tonight. You're not going to wake up wondering if today's the day you catch plague. You're not going to bury your children in frozen ground or eat mouldy bread or drink water that might kill you. You have antibiotics if you get sick, painkillers if you hurt, and a society that at least tries to keep people alive through winter. You have options medieval people never had, and you have them so readily available that you take them completely for granted. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in comfort that would make a medieval peasant weep with joy, maybe spare a thought for your ancestors who survived the unsurvivable. Think about the grandmother who endured plague winter and lived to tell about it, passing her genes down through generations until they reached you. Think about the grandfather who gathered firewood in blizzards, who ate frozen turnips, who held his dying children and somehow kept going. They're why you're here. Their stubbornness, their refusal to die, their grinding daily determination to survive one more day, that's in your blood. The stories of plague winter are mostly lost now. The peasants who lived through it couldn't write, and the literate class was too busy dying or fleeing to document much. What survived are fragments, hints, statistical records of death that can't capture the daily reality of suffering. But we know enough to understand that it was worse than we can fully imagine, and that the people who endured it were tougher than we give them credit for. History may be full of gross, terrifying, brutal realities, but it's also proof that humans are incredibly, stubbornly, sometimes stupidly resilient. We survive things that should kill us. We endure conditions that seem impossible. We find ways to keep going even when giving up would be easier. Medieval peasants in plague winter proved this beyond any doubt. They lived through hell and came out the other side, damaged but alive, ready to rebuild a world from frozen ashes. So as you close your eyes tonight, warm and safe and comfortable, remember them. Remember the people who suffered so completely that your worst day would seem like paradise to them. Remember that your existence is built on thousands of years of humans refusing to die, refusing to give up, surviving everything nature and disease and winter could throw at them. And maybe, just maybe, whisper a quiet thank you to the past, to the cold, the hunger, the plague, and the stubborn, broken, magnificent people who survived it all so that you could be here, cozy in your climate-controlled room, falling asleep to a story about their suffering, because they made it through the darkest winter, and that's why you get to enjoy this one from the comfort of your warm bed, with your full stomach, and your working immune system, and your antibiotics, and your central heating, and all the modern miracles you barely notice. Sleep well, stay warm, and be grateful you'll wake up tomorrow without having to break ice at a well, bury a neighbour, or wonder if today's the day the plague finds you. Your ancestors survived plague winter so you wouldn't have to. Honour them by sleeping peacefully in a world they could never have dreamed possible. Good night,